I'm not church by ourselves at 16. Isn't it interesting how we can see? Did you have a I'm a 4 piano player. Did you change it already? I'm excited for this.
Bread was good, huh?
I haven't tried it yet.
Oh, it's
I'm
good.
savoring the smell before I start.
It smells good too. You're right. So I didn't dinner, so it was good to have some breakfast.
I had a late lunch.
I ate breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner. They're all small. I just it works for me.
I don't plan ahead enough to do that, so I just when I feel hungry, I go eat a bunch. It's not healthy.
Okay, council, we're ready to begin. It is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025 at 6:07 p.m. We welcome everyone out to the work session to discuss the library fund study. I'm not, is Fred going to kind of start it? Is that going to kind of be the process? Is there someone else? I don't know if Donna is going to, who's going to kind of start leading us into it?
The plan is that Fred would do his presentation first, and
Okay.
then I would answer and kind of explain things a little more after he was done.
Okay, so Fred, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Let me also try to share my screen.
He is echoey. Is there a reason he's so echoey?
How about now? Am I still providing an echo?
You are. Sorry.
Let's see.
We can hear you, Fred.
Okay. And you can see my screen?
We can.
Okay, the presentation. Alrighty. So, yeah, my objective was to look at the library fund and the specific tax levy associated with the operations of the library, and to develop a financial model around sustainability and determining what that looks like for the library fund. So I'm going to go through that, highlight our baseline model assumptions and the projections under specific scenarios. And then we'll talk about next steps. Donna's also provided some information relative to some statistics and comparisons, and I'll highlight that. And then, as Donna indicated, if there are questions, happy to address those, or if there are questions directed to Donna, then I'll defer to her. Our objective was to look at the ongoing operations and maintenance of the library and make projections relative to growth in revenues and expenses. We also looked at unfunded operational needs and layered in scenarios around funding those, which include replacement of books, the additional staffing needs that may exist, and potential salary changes. We also included a scenario where we looked at any capital cost associated with library expansion. So if there was a desire to expand the library and provide additional service or expanded level of service as your community reaches build out, then we've got a scenario that potentially looks at that. All of these scenarios were, our basis for evaluation was looking at the tax impacts as we try to achieve sustainability. Again, I'll highlight that these are preliminary scenarios, and the intent of this is to stimulate discussion on where we go from here, if continued evaluation is needed or additional action items, those types of things, so that we can refine the scenarios and provide you with additional information. So with regards to our model assumptions, we grew revenues at 2% annually. Historically, from 2020 to 2024, you had a slightly higher growth in revenues at 2.9%. That's your property tax revenue growth based on essentially new residential units, new brick and mortar that comes into Highland. The reason why we pulled that down is because we're assuming that there's going to be slightly less growth than what you experienced over the last couple of years, based on the number of new homes that we were looking at potentially happening over the next several years. So we did pull that down to be a little more conservative. On the expense side, we increased your base expense by 2% annually. So historically, just looking at kind of long-term national standards, inflation, like the municipal cost index or the consumer price index, shows higher inflation than that, especially when you account for the last couple of years. Again, we're trying to be conservative in the model, assuming that the city can control and create efficiencies in your base expense and keep those growing at 2% annually. We also assume, there is no existing debt now, but we do look at potential bonding scenarios or amortizing costs of any capital expansion. We don't, pull that all in 1 year. We look at amortizing that cost. As we look at unfunded operation and maintenance expenses, we've included these elements, looking at potentially moving a part-time employee to a full-time employee, which would add slightly under or under $40,000 of annualized expense. This is to try to move a part-time collection manager to a full-time position. And then as we continue to have additional demand on your services at the library, we're adding, there's the option to add one part-time employee. So that would add another almost 15,000 in operational expense. The next two are scenarios revolve around the scenario if we were to expand. So if we were to add additional library space, physical space, then we would trigger a new FTE for the library and add new O&M for the library expansion, new department-related expense. These are only brought in, again, if the library is expanded, then those trigger, and we bring in that 80,000 of operational cost into the analysis. And then finally, the O&M, additional O&M that we're looking at is has to do with Donna's retirement. So she provided some information relative to comparable salaries of other library directors, which are higher on average than what you're paying now. And that there was a conscious effort to do that to keep your expense lower. But as you look to fill that position following Donna's retirement, then that could result in some additional expense to get someone to fill that position. So we didn't bring in the max, relative to what we saw in other communities, but we did add about $20,000 of additional expense to bring that up. Again, in the event of Donna's retirement within a couple of years. So that is layered in as an additional O&M expense as well.
And is that $20,000 based on current salary comparison or projected 2028 salaries?
Yes, that's current, and then I inflate that. So that shows the year it comes in, but that's the base cost. All of those numbers there, I inflate them by 3% average inflationary rate. So at 2028, it's more like $22,000. So it does bring in some inflation based on the timing year.
Okay, but that inflation happens later in the model?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So it comes in later. Alrighty. So in addition, Donna provided some statistics relative to use, showing that that library use has increased. While the patrons haven't, so you see patron increase of 4%. This is a 6-month period from 23 to 24. And maybe library visits are about 6%. Some of the other programs, your physical circulation, digital circulation, and your program attendance are up quite a bit more than that, suggesting that while you may not have necessarily new patrons, you have new demand on the system in the form of maybe children accessing those programs, families accessing those programs that are increasing the demand on the system, on your services that you're providing. So a way to show that in addition to just inflationary pressure, there have been increased demands on your services that have been a result of the additional growth that the city has experienced over the last several years. There are definitely positives related to that growth as we bring in new rooftops and new commercial development. It also results in new demands on the system, which you can see here based on these percentages. So what we looked at in addition to those operational needs, as I mentioned, we also looked at capital needs in the form of book replacement costs and the potential library expansion. So when it comes to the capital investment and book replacement, Donna estimated about $61,000 in expense related to wear and tear, books that have experienced a high amount of wear and tear that should be replaced. That $61,180 is spread over a 5-year period, so we're not incurring all of that in one single year. We take about $12,000 each year and apply that in our model. In addition, we have about $80,000 of expense related to books that are just old and outdated. That $80,000 is also spread over 5 years and brought into the model as a essentially one-time expense that is incurred over the 5-year period for each of those line items. And then the big ticket item is adding additional library space. Donna provided some information relative to what that might look like. There was some additional work done prior to me being involved on what sort of costs that might look like for the expansion. We're estimating that the total for the expansion would actually be about $2.5 million, but we're anticipating $1 million will come from fundraising or donations. And so the model assumes, okay, if we have to fund $1.5 million and we amortize that, what would that look like if we were to bring that in the analysis? So that's also included as a potential scenario as we look at kind of the capital side of replacement of books and library expansion. This shows that this shows the percent of collection added by year. Donna, this is maybe one area chart that I'm hoping you can chime in on the percent of collection by year added.
Yeah, can I talk about that for a bit?
Yes.
Okay, so I did a study of how many books in our current collection were ordered each year that the library's been open, and about 19% were books that were carried over from storage from when the library had been in storage for 7 years. So those are old books. And then you can see that other bump at 2017, 2018. That's when the library was acquiring books, trying to get up to 50,000 so they could become full NuClick members. And I did a search of those. Those were mostly donated books. Those weren't books that were purchased. And the average publication date for those books acquired in those years was 2009. So those were also older books. So even though we have been, spending by getting 2,000 to 3,000 books a year since then, a large portion of our collection is really quite old.
Donna, given the state, particularly of our children's collection, the 61,000 seemed low to me. Is that a conservative number, or am I just are my expectations just off?
I was trying to be realistic. I mean, yes, we could use more than that, but could we handle more than that? I mean, it takes time to order, select, and plus, are we going to just buy duplicates of the same books? How many books come out a year? So it was kind of a realistic, instead of, I would love to replace more of the collection, but it's not really practical.
Okay, thanks.
Donna, with the books that came in from those who donated them, I remember a lot of people bringing in used books. Were those books, a lot of them done in our book sale to get rid of them? Were some of them good enough? I mean, what percentage of those that were donated were you able to put inside the library to be used?
The ones that were donated, so that bump there, those were donated and added to our collection. And that was just to raise the number of books in our collection so we could qualify to be a full NuClick member. And we weeded out a lot of the ones that were donated that year, but at least, now about 22% of our books that we currently have were donated in that time period. Okay, I'm done.
Thanks, Donna. So our next step was to take all of that information and provide a baseline scenario, which is no tax increase. We didn't bring any of the new O&M and all of that FTE change or salaries, no new capital, so no book replacement, no new building. And essentially what's happening is we just do not have enough growth in revenue to mitigate inflation. There are some revenue line items that we're assuming won't really grow in our analysis, like fines, those types of things. But we're primarily driven by whatever new growth we get in property tax revenue, which isn't a lot in the library fund, compared to the expenditure growth that we're going to have to balance against that inflationary pressure that happens. We're not starting at a very high fund balance. So you can see here it's above 60,000 as a fund balance, and it continues to drop as we draw down that fund balance to fund our operations. It doesn't go negative, so it does stay positive here, which is still a good thing. But you can see that it continues to erode and our fund balance declines. So those types of trends are concerning. Often, as we look at these types of sustainability models, without action, inflation can erode whatever fund balance exists. So we have to evaluate what that looks like. Are there ways to be more efficient ways that we can control expense, or do we have to look at our revenue stream and try to evaluate that and bring in additional revenue? So this is kind of the baseline do nothing, that there could be some challenges as you move forward relative to sustainability. So then what we looked at is, okay, let's look at a scenario where we bring in that new O&M, just the elements that we discussed relative to salaries, not including any FTEs related to library expansion. So we're not including that, but we did include the moving part-time to full-time and adding another part-time employee and some additional director wages when Donna retires. So in order to do that, in order to fund those elements and try to help mitigate some of that erosion in our baseline scenario, we looked at a potential tax increase. It's about a 32% increase in your tax levy, your current tax levy, which is the equivalent of about $1, slightly under $1.50 per month for $1 million home. So I tried to get it as a comparison on what you might pay monthly, assuming $1 million home, and that 32% increase would be the equivalent of about $1.50. It's slightly lower than that, but if we wanted to fund those elements, the new O&M, and try to mitigate some of that erosion, that's what this scenario looks like. You can see here I'm programming that all up front. So for these scenarios, we just looked at, okay, if we took action now, what does that look like? There are other ways to evaluate that, where we could look at phasing in increases over time, and manipulating some of those assumptions so that it's not all up front. But again, going back to the baseline, when we go back to here, it's this is a worrying trend. So we looked at taking action immediately and say, okay, what would that look like? Again, that's on a $1 million home.
Can I ask a question here,
Yeah.
Fred? That does include, we've allowed, and being on the board, I'm ashamed to say that the board allowed and this body allowed Donna to not take increases in salary so we could maintain services. And to me, that's short-sighted. And shame on me and shame on us. But does this fix that?
Yes, this is including, so that this scenario includes the $20,000 of additional wage for the director position.
But it includes that 20,000 out in 2028.
Correct.
And are these calendar years or fiscal years?
Fiscal year. It would be, I mean, the actual tax assessments happen on a different timeline than your fiscal year, but all of our analysis is based on your budget, your fiscal year budget. So then our our next scenario looked at, well, before we jump there, this is the trend line now. With that tax increase, you can see by bringing in revenues up front, it helps build some fund balance, and we end slightly higher than where we began, but there still is a trend that as we look to the future, inflation may continue to apply some pressure on the model. So while we take action in the 5-year window, what we're looking at here, it would likely be that you would need to continue to take action or look at some additional action in 2030, again, because inflation will apply that pressure. So that issue of inflation is not something that will go away. So we need to keep that in our mind as we look at sustainability in this model, that if we do nothing, then eventually inflation will erode all fund balance and you'll have to take action, right? Expenses go up, and if our revenues aren't keeping up with that trend line, then we have a problem. So, but that type of action, by doing something up front, that does help infuse some additional operational capacity in the fund and achieve at least a fund balance that's equivalent to what we have now. Under scenario 2, what we're looking at is then layering in the new capital, which is the book replacement, as well as all the new O&M that we discussed. So if we're going to do that, then we're essentially going to need to double the tax rate. That's about a $4.35 increase per month on a $1 million home. To put that into context, right now the taxes generated in the library fund are about $350,000. As we look to layering in debt and the new capital, we need to get that up to about $650,000 or $700,000 of revenue, which would cover a debt service payment, inflation, and the new operation and maintenance expenses that we're projecting. So it's a big percentage increase. So again, doubling, we're looking at 100% increase to the tax levy. On a dollar basis, it may appear more manageable. So looking at a monthly increase on $1 million home, that's the $4.35. Again, that's per month. So annually, we just multiply that by 12. So you'd be looking at about $50 annually of an increase. Donna provided some information to put that into context. So looking at your existing tax rate, you're at 000104 for your tax levy. So you can see that here at the bottom of this comparison chart. You're essentially one of the lowest tax levies for, I believe these are single city tax rates, correct, Donna?
Yes. So these are all the libraries in the state that have a designated tax rate that are a single city, not like a county system.
Yes. So you're one of the lowest, the second to the bottom, with your tax rate. You can see
Even
there.
if double, we're towards the bottom.
Yes, exactly, and that's the other point. Is even doubling your tax rate, you're still in the lower part of this comparison. You would have, I mean, some of these are quadruple your tax rate as they provide service for their communities. So we wanted to put again that into context. Sometimes when you look at percentages, that can be daunting to say 100% increase. But relatively speaking, when you look at the dollar amount and the comparison chart, you would still be one of the lower tax rates when it comes to providing services to community for the library. So that again provides some information or context relative to that percentage increase. As we look at the chart, here you can see this provides quite a bit more sustainability. So as we double the tax rate, and if you take action now rather than waiting, so where we showed the potential capital improvements a couple of years down the road, 2028, maybe even beyond that, but in the model I programmed them for 2028. If you take action now, then that allows you actually to build fund balance in preparation for that. And then it levels off here. So you can see that as we get to 2028 and we experience start experiencing the book replacement, the new O&M, and the debt service payment, the potential debt service payment, we now stabilize here for the couple of years. But because we took action sooner, if you were to take action, for example, in fiscal year 26, then you generate more fund balance in advance of those expenses, and it puts the library in a potentially better position because you've got more fund balance sitting there. And then you start incurring the expense that then stabilizes that contribution of fund balance. So that is one of the benefits from taking action quicker or in advance of those expenses. Obviously, that can also be perceived as a downside because you're now maybe generating excess revenues that could be used elsewhere.
So, Fred, just have a question.
Yeah.
Looking at this, you're assuming that we have taken on a debt load of 1.5 million and we're servicing the debt. And you're saying that after we've put that in, we have $600,000 in a fund balance, even though we're servicing the debt. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, so we've assumed that you would take that 1.5 million, maybe amortizing that over a 20-year period. You couldn't, you may have to do like a 15-year period, but right now we included some assumptions relative to a 20-year amortization, assuming 4% coupon. What type of debt service might we cover? I've got it about $110,000. There's some, flexibility in that. If we said, we don't want to amortize that over 20 years. We want it to be over 10 years, double that debt service payment. That would then pull this fund balance down. We'd have to evaluate that, but we're not.
Why does the library need to have a $600,000 fund balance?
Yeah, that would be the question. Again, it's if we take action now, it builds up reserve, but you can see then it stabilizes. So we're no longer contributing to fund balance. I was looking at establishing a tax levy that would meet those obligations by 2030. But one solution, and I'll highlight this, is you could actually phase that over time so that then it mitigates this upfront accumulation of fund balance. So you'd say, okay, let's do a percentage increase now and then next year and then the following year to get ready for this, whatever, debt service and expense we have out here. And that would shave off this accumulation of fund balance in the interim. The idea is to show you what it would need to look like, though, to get your revenues in line with those expenses. That's eventually where we would have to get to achieve what we need to relative to new O&M, a debt service payment, and funding inflation and maintaining your capital expense or your operational expense that you currently fund out of the library fund. So there's a way to massage that so that you don't accumulate as much fund balance. Some entities like to see what it looks like if you take action sooner, again, because if we have to get up to doubling our tax rate, and we know that's where we need to get, there is a benefit to taking action sooner rather than later because you compound that benefit. We say, okay, let's do it now. We know we have to get there. If we do it now, then we actually build up some reserves rather than, delaying that. So there is some benefit is really what this is trying to show you. Again, there's alternatives to phase that in over time, which is what I show in the next slide here. So, these are obviously some baseline and preliminary scenarios of what does it look like if we need to start funding these deficiencies in our baseline, and if we need to start looking at increasing our operational budget and trying to fund some capital investment. that's not the, the only, these are not the only scenarios that we can look at. Additional scenarios could be looking at phased tax increase versus an immediate increase. So what, if we want to phase that in over time, over the next couple of years, what does that look like? Obviously, taking no action is still an option. That leads to discussions relative to levels of service and what those funding shortfalls might be. That may lead to discussions of a general fund subsidy, or saying, okay, we don't want to have a tax increase at all. We're going to let the general fund transfer money into the library fund, and that's how we'll address any shortfalls. That's how we can address capital improvements or expansion. Additional scenario might be combining that tax levy with the general fund and absorbing the library fund into the general fund and treating it as part of that, just like Parks and Recreation is evaluated. So there are other scenarios that we can look at. I wanted to highlight those again because the objective here is to stimulate discussion, highlight that there are issues under the baseline scenario. If we do nothing with regards to new revenue, then again, there's the potential that inflation will erode your fund balance and you'll potentially have a problem situation. But there may be alternatives that we can evaluate, and that's where we want your input, and then I can go back and model those and provide additional scenario analysis. Once we have that input, again, I go back and revise scenarios, provide additional information. We anticipate that we'll have more discussions with you to present those scenarios. And then from that, we start looking at what are our preferred alternatives. And I can create a model around those preferences and determine an action plan. Any questions on those scenarios or where we go from here?
I'd just like to say I appreciate your studies on this, Phil. Just a couple of questions, and I'm going to open this up to David, our CFO, as well. So I'm always just a wee bit perplexed when we've got as much growth as we have in the city. On the property tax, I mean, we haven't raised property tax for years here in the city. But on property tax that you pay directly to Highland City, which I think is about 11.8% of our total property tax comes to the city. I mean, the rest goes to the school district and the county and things. But 15% of that 11.8%, I'm just saying this off the top of my head because it changes from year to year, 15% of that basically goes as a dedicated tax to the library. So I'm just a little perplexed when we've got 689 units coming online over the next year or two in Ridgeview. And I have some other questions about that. Plus, the hollows are being developed with huge homes that are going to be paying a lot of property tax. Plus, we've got this other development. What's it named again? Fox Hollow? Foxwood on the side. Why there's not some feeling that we're not going to generate some more property tax for the library? I just would like to understand. I know there's always a delay or year or two from the time the property's bought, the time the building's built. So, for example, this is the other question I have, is Boyer building these 4 townhome combination blocks. They're finishing them up. I mean, they're putting the siding and everything on the north end. They're going to keep those and lease those. Property tax-wise, do they just pay for the 1 4-block area, or is there a property tax on each one of those units? How does that work? I'm just kind of would like to understand why property tax never, I know the county gives us so much, but we get more with growth every year. I just kind of like, it seems like we're really conservative on what we estimate our property tax will be.
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff there, but yeah.
Yes, on the library side, I don't have the city, your general fund budget numbers in front of me, but from the library side, just using the library's tax levy, you've received about, on average, about $10,000 of new revenue in taxes from 2020 to 2025 budget. So that's annually. So you get about $10,000 more in revenue each year.
Right. But but that's not going to be the steady growth because we've got a bunch of units coming on in that subdivision. So it should spike up a little bit, I would think.
I think you've also
Yeah.
had some, and maybe Aaron, or you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Jared, but there's been growth historically from 2020 to 2025 as well. You've had some residential development happening in the city, some periods of growth in that time from 2020 to 2025.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that, Fred. So I have numbers in front of me that go back to July of 2021. That the fiscal year 2022, so ending June 30th of 2022, we brought in just under 280,000. The next year was just under 300,000, so we actually saw a $20,000 jump that year. But then from fiscal year 23 to 24, it was only a $4,000 jump. And then from 24 to 25, about a $10,000 jump, like Fred mentioned. So it does kind of ebb and flow. There's spikes and then decreases, but on average, about 10,000 a year. If you average it out.
But that still doesn't reflect much of what's happening in Ridgeview.
I
nor
think
the
it does.
Hollows.
I think you're
Yeah.
overestimating how much increase comes to the library from each house. So if we're only getting like $65 a year from each house, if there's 100 new houses, that's only $6,500. It's not a big
Right.
increase.
But we're talking about development of like, if you add them all together, 750. So,
But it's
I
spread
just
over several
like to
years.
understand.
Yeah.
It seems like the growth
We do
doesn't make
account
any
for
difference.
some of that.
Yeah.
We do account, we looked at about 500 units as an estimate for the next 5 years added to the system. And then I compared that to what has been the historic growth, new growth numbers for Highland. So, historically, your new growth variable has varied from 100 million in 1 year. So 2024, you actually had about $100 million of growth. In 2022, you had $164 million of new growth. But it ebbs and flows. You've averaged about $86 million of new growth added to the property tax rolls. We pulled that down to about 70 million. So we're assuming that you are going to have growth. So we do include some of that. Donna indicated it doesn't translate to a whole lot of new property tax revenue, because you have to remember, if it's residential development, then you take 55% of that value. So you can have a lot of residential value, but there is a residential exemption when it comes to property tax allocation. The other element that can be misleading is within the general fund, there are other revenues that get generated from your residential base in addition to property tax. So you get all of the sales tax revenues that are generated from that as well, that help fund your level of service within the general fund. That doesn't happen on the library side. So we only get the property tax revenue that comes from that levy. Again, that, if it's a lot of residential development, then we're only getting 55% of that value in the property tax rolls. If it's a lot of commercial value, then there's a little bit more bang for your buck there. But we can adjust. At the end of the day, we can adjust some of those assumptions. We are being a little more conservative by including about $70 million of new growth per year, which is slightly lower than that average you experience over the last couple of years. But we can modify that if there's concern, like, hey, maybe we're being too conservative, then we can massage that a little bit. But just to provide you some information, we have included some growth when it comes to property tax growth.
One last perspective. So David and staff and I are furiously working on the draft of next year's budget. In looking at the library, Donna has cut everywhere she can, and we are $15,000 in the hole this coming year. And that doesn't address the things that Fred and Donna have put in here about potentially adding another part-time staff member or transitioning her to full-time or getting her wage up to market. It's just to keep the status quo, and ultimately it'll mean a slightly lower level of service, right? Because we're not adding more an inflationary component for books. So even if we were to double, so right now we're projecting a $6,000 increase in property taxes this year, right? Because we've hovered between 5 and 10. Even if we were to triple that, we'd be maybe $3,000 positive, right? So we'd be okay maybe for a year, but then like we are nearing the cliff. If it's not this year, it's next year, just depending on when we get that Ridgeview revenue.
And just looking at the proposed, the projected revenue increases, if we're going out 5 years and we're projecting a 2% increase in revenue every year, call that 10% revenue growth. 10% would be what, in the ballpark of 550 average priced homes.
I'm sure I understood that.
Here is an interesting. I went and pulled up some Ridgeview property, to see what the property tax value. It appears they're probably generating about $35 per rental unit. So this is the rental units that would be, coming in. So those rental units are about $35. If it's a Hollows home, the one down in the Hollows, it's about $200 a year. That would go to the library. This is the library aspect. And so, because right now, like the Ridgeview house, paying the city's $190 in their property tax a year comes to the city. So 15% of that, is. But if you go to the Hollows, they're gonna generate $200. So so it kind of just depends on what you're looking at. It does appear that we still have of Ridgeview about half, because they're showing the land value on the property tax records. About half of them are showing their value at $105,000. Once they get billed out, they seem to be a tax value about $480,000. So I'm just, so there is some timing that's happening here that we haven't. But it's about Ridgeview will generate about $20,000. It appears $20,000 to $25,000 for the library. If you're wondering what the
per year,
yeah, that's what we should be seeing from Ridgeview. At least that's coming off of rough calculations. So, but council, I think some of the questions that we have about 5 minutes, which we never have enough time. Is there other things, Fred, you need to cover? You've got some good discussion points here.
No, that's all I needed to cover. Again, I'm hoping we get feedback, and then I can coordinate with Donna on additional scenario analysis. What additional data do we need to provide, and how can we best help
So here's the 2 questions I would have. What is, we don't have a library impact fee, correct? Is that something other cities?
No, you cannot have an impact fee for libraries.
You cannot. Why? Because you have to increase service as they move in, just like we have to increase for parks.
It's not, by statute, it's not included as a qualified public facility.
Okay, that was. I'm just wondering, because it goes, we had Ridgeview. It would have been nice to have library impact, because they are impacting as the growth. The next question is this for David. Of the library, are there things the city, and I'm going back to many, do we charge the library for power, for phones? Is there certain things that we are looking at there that as a city, we might be able to say, hey, maybe we cover some of that that type of overhead? Is that, if we're looking to try to,
that's,
so if we try to close that gap.
That's one of the topics that we brought up in our budget meeting with Donna, is reevaluating those allocations, the direct overhead and the IT allocations, and seeing if there's places we can save
right now it's
library money
about
there.
10,000, I think.
I'm just saying, if we can look at utility, I mean, there might be saying, hey, how does the city come and help the library, and maybe trying to cover some of those costs to try to get us a little further.
Charging the library, because we're charging the library.
Correct. It's a cross. It used to be a cross charge. We used to charge rent. You weren't here, right, Donna, when that was all going on?
You did away with that the first year I was here.
Yeah. So we used to do cross. So I understand there's some charges. So I'm just saying, as a council, that might be an area to look at.
But they're
There's
not.
an area to look at.
They're not a lot. They're only about $8,000.
Okay.
Hey Donna, how
And
much
so
do you,
it's just kind of a drop in the bucket. Yes.
how much do you charge for non-resident rate for library cards
We have been charging $70
per
It's
year?
going up to $90 next month.
Okay.
So non-residents are paying more than we are.
So $90 a month, and that's a yearly basis, right?
What's that?
That's an annual basis.
It's an annual charge.
Do you know what the increase in revenue will be by $70 to $90?
It's hard to tell because some people might stop getting non-resident cards because of the increase in price. But we were expecting that it would increase by, you're showing me something. My estimate, if 15% of the people who are getting non-resident cards decide not to anymore or to get one at a different library because it will be the same price as American Fork and Pleasant Grove, then the increase in revenue overall, when you subtract what we won't be collecting in overdue fines, is $3,200.
Brittany asked a question. Is the library card, is that a auto renewal every year, or do they have to come in and actually sign up?
You have to come in.
Can we do auto renewal though?
I've never investigated that.
You know, if other libraries do auto renewal, because I really like that idea.
I don't know any library that auto renewals their non-resident.
Okay.
Do you know what the churn is on our non-resident cards?
What the what?
What the churn is? The percentage that we lose every year that don't get renewed?
The number of non-residents cards have increased every year since I became director.
And remember, this year, the library is also going to start having the transfers where they can get a book here transferred up from
The Timpanogos Consortium. Yeah.
Yeah, I was asking about churn because if the churn is really, really low, then we get no benefit essentially from auto renewing. Right. Right.
Okay, so David, let me ask you. So the only funds the library is receiving, I just want to make sure how they're getting funded, is the property tax. We take that full amount and give them that. So if I look, if we're saying Ridgeview, a new home comes in, it's $35. That's all they're receiving. They're not getting any other benefit coming in from the city, correct? So as we look, some of the council members are paying about $45 a year for the use of the library, and some are paying $65. If we lived over in the Hollows, you'd be paying $200. I'm just saying there's ranges we're seeing depending on where you're at.
Right. So I know we're ending here. So
Yes.
I just want to say I 100% support the library, and I think my history is consistent with that. At the same time, I like the library being supported by the property tax, the dedicated tax, and I fought to keep that over the years. I'm not opposed to increasing that. In my opinion, it's the timing. And I think as a council, we've got a lot of things we're kind of juggling right now and a lot of uncertainty. And, and especially this week, it's hard to say. So I'd like to kind of think about this more and discuss it more. I think it's going to be hard to have a truth in taxation and raise everybody's property tax by $5 a month. I mean, that doesn't sound like much, but we've got some huge sewer fees coming through, garbage fee increases. We've got uncertainty about what's happening with the school board and how many increases. So I think we have to kind of put it all together. So I support an increase at some point. I just don't know about the timing. I'd like to look at all these other things so that we know. So I really appreciate this study, but I think as a whole, as the city, and my experience has been the time I've been on the councils, we oftentimes are very conservative with what our revenue brings in, and that's smart. But at the same time, we always have a little extra. So, I know we need to be talking about this. I'd like to think more about it, when to raise things if we need to.
One of the considerations.
It is because of the uncertainty and the fact that taxes might be going up because of the new school district and fees might be going up, that I think this year is a good year to do it so that everyone's not hit with everything at the same time.
So here's the concern. We have 70% of the survey that said they would not support a tax increase to the library. And I understand that they're not educated. We just asked a question. You can go out and do some education. And I'm just going to be very open. Right now, what we're seeing in the national government is cut, and cut. And I think that we're going to just take an environment. I think that's why you got to give a little bit of time and see how this environment plays. because if everyone's in that mode, I do think, council, we're going to have to be cautious in how we approach some things, because if that's what the word's out there, then also we're increasing. You can get a riling up. I mean, I recognize you guys want to do it before the school district, because you believe there's a new district comes in that following year or 2 years out, that board might be passing some things, so you're trying to get ahead. We have our public safety is also trying to do some increases this year. Scott's talked about
Sewer and garbage.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Can
we don't know the
I
time-
talk a little bit about the survey? Jay, can you go onto my next screen and go to the survey?
About 3 minutes.
And it won't take much longer than that. Okay, so in the survey, everyone says nobody wants a tax raise. Nobody wants a tax raise. But let's look at what the other things people said in the survey. They said that for the library, we had 94% approval rate. On the previous screen, we had 87% overall approval and then 94% staff approval. Okay, and then the next one. So 7% of people said that they would probably use our new library consortium service. So these are high number. We have a lot of support for the library in the city. Go ahead to the next one. And it's interesting that this survey was, a majority of them were people with children not in the home. And we always think, oh, the library is for people with children. But the survey was done, had more people who didn't have children in the home than that did. And still those numbers were really high. Okay, go to the next one. So the question about would you be willing to raise taxes to keep up with growth for the library? So 38% were said definitely not. And I don't think we can really change their minds. But 32% said probably not. And I think what that means is if we did some education and some publicity, those people might change their minds. They're not like, definitely not, no more taxes. And then a whole 30% said yes or probably yes. So I think there's a lot of potential here to get the community on board for a tax rate increase if we start doing some PR campaigns. So go back to the or to the next one. That's fine. I don't think it's a hard sell. So $1.65 a month could get you half a dozen eggs or a whole bunch of new books for kids. $4.65 a month could get you one specialty drink or way short wait lines on your Libby app. So it's not a hard sell, and I think we could do it. And it would bring not only money into the library. Which is my need
and which is my want? I'm just being honest. Okay, which is the need and which is the want? The cookies, I want. The drinks, I want.
A drink.
The eggs, I probably.
A cookie.
Right now,
half a dozen eggs.
It's a want.
That's a joke about the bird flu. So it's not a hard sell. If we started a PR campaign, I think people would get behind it. And it would not only bring money to the library, in extension, it brings money into the city, right? Because the library is part of the city. And this is a year where we can sell this because of the new services we're offering. And if we don't, we're missing an opportunity to really benefit both the library and the city, because this is the year where we're adding the extra services, and I think we can sell it.
And it is election year.
And
yeah, but the people.
It is. It would be good to hear.
And that's another reason too. We're losing some of our best supporters.
Let me know who to
Donna,
vote for or not pretty fast.
This is
Donna,
the year.
thanks for all your work.
No, that's the thing.
You've turned the library around. The board's been excellent. We appreciate it. It's just a matter of we're trying to figure this out.
And I do appreciate the information. I think we need to look long term. How are we going to fund and help build a grow? How do we the services we want to provide? I think that's going to be the big thing. And then how do we veto this 2028 thing that might be happening?
What did you say that?
Now, was that an announcement today?
You're talking about the retirement thing?
You're too young to retire.
We might make it to 28. I don't know if we will.
I understand.
So
And we gotta be careful. Donna, you have done a great job, and I do appreciate the board and all their efforts they put in.
Thank you so
to
much.
Fred-
We'll go ahead and conclude that work session.
To
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the library board. Thank you all. Thanks for this information. We appreciate it.
Yep, you're welcome. See ya.
Should we take?
Tim, you can.
Our dear Father in heaven, we're so grateful for tonight for the opportunity that we have to come together as community members and friends and make decisions and talk about issues that affect our community. And we pray that as we do so, we will be able to make decisions with kindness and fairness and grace and have thy Spirit with us in all that we do. We ask for thy blessing to be with those in the world who are not experiencing the same type of safety and freedom and security that we do, and pray for those affected around us. Please bless our military and our public safety professionals and everything that they do as they protect us. And we're so grateful for our freedoms and the blessings that we enjoy, and pray for thy Spirit tonight in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
As we look over our agenda, we have our first one will be what's called unscheduled public appearances. We do have a public hearing, which is the next item, which is action item number 2A, which will be the public hearing on the PO zone. So the first half is unscheduled public appearances if you're here to discuss things other than the one that will be on the Patterson PO zone. That will be a public hearing. So at this time, we'd like to open it up for anyone who'd like to come and address the council on any topic. If you can please state your name and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Does anyone like to come and address the council? Carl?
Good evening. First of all, my name is Carl Hull, and I want to thank you for your service. In my view, this is true public service. The elected officials and the state and the country, I'm not so sure that's true public service, but I feel like this is where it really happens. So thank you for your service. 26-year resident of Highland, Utah. Love it here. Raised my kids here, had a great experience here, and I am a frequent user of Canal Boulevard. So I wanted to give you my perspective as a resident. I think that I saw in the last agenda or the last minutes that there was a proposition to reduce the speed limit to 25. I would like to propose that we increase the speed limit to 35, and here's my proposal. Speeders are going to speed no matter what. I had teenagers, I have neighbors, I have friends. Those who are going to speed are going to speed. It is true. The speed bumps slowed them down a little bit, but they still sped. And I think that when we do stuff like that, when we reduce the speed limit, we are punishing those of us who try to live the laws, try to be reasonable, try to be responsible. We're punishing everybody for the one or two kids in the class. When I was a kid in high school and junior high, it ticked me off when one kid would mess up and we'd all get punished. And I feel like, oh, we've got some bad speeders, so let's just punish everybody. And I feel like it's going to be setting up a speed trap for me and for people like me who are responsible, good drivers, and we're going to get caught. And that's why I say 35 miles per hour is an appropriate speed, because the 6,000 West that it intersects with is 35 miles per hour. 6,000 West is straight, but it's more narrow, and it has driveways coming onto the street. Canal Boulevard has no driveways. It's way wider. There is one big swell in it, and I think that could be safely managed at 35 miles per hour. That's the speed I go. I go 35 miles per hour all the time. When I come around that corner for somebody there, I've got easily I can stop and prevent any type of problem from happening. So my recommendation is consider setting the speed limit back to 35, and then post fines, or post a sign saying fines are doubled in this zone, and really go after those who are offending the law, those who are creating problems. Let's get them punished and leave the rest of us out of it, and let us enjoy that and use that in a safe, responsible manner. And that, to me, is a way better solution than than further aggravating people like me who are really good people and we are good drivers. And if you reduce it to 25, I will reduce my speed down, but I'll be aggravated the entire time. So I would just like to say, let's work together on this and do it the right way. And let's get the people that are speeding and let's punish them. Thank you.
So I've never done this before, so you guys are witnessing a first tonight. I've literally never spoken at a city council meeting, so this is fun. I'm Aaron Gleave, Highland resident for about 4 years now, and we moved in with a brand new baby 4 years ago. During the first year, we noticed families driving around with golf carts and with their kids, and we thought, wow, we've moved to the coolest city ever. This is amazing. 18 months later, we invested in one. We thought we got to get one as we talked to all our friends and neighbors who had them, and we got to get one. So we did. We invested in one. And for the next 2 years, we just enjoyed Highland City in a way that we've never enjoyed any neighborhood before. There's so many parks here. I think there's like more parks per capita than any other town. And our boys loved it. We have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. He was brand new when we moved in, but 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they love it. They just look forward to it. And we got out into the community in a way that we never had before. So aside from the parks and driving around, we discovered that driving golf carts actually connected us with the community in a way that I never thought would be real. We started connecting with people at random all over the place. And now we've got friends all over Highland. Literally everywhere in Highland, we've got friends we stop by. There's a guy who loves Corvettes over off of 6400 West, and we were driving through his neighborhood one day, and we met him, and the boys ran around, and so we've made some unbelievable friends here in the community doing that. I've driven over most of the roads, the collector roads. The shoulders are plenty wide here. There's room for 2 golf carts side by side on a lot of the roads here. These vehicles are just, they're so fun. They're not intimidating. They're not meant to be. They're not meant to be fast. They only go like 15 miles an hour most of the time. And we get passed by electric scooters and bicycles a lot of the time, just like pedal bikes, not electric bikes. So anyway, we're in strong support of Highland as a community supporting this and allowing this in a way that's responsible. Preparing for this, I looked into some data with Ron, and we were talking about 10400 North and how there's 31 auto accidents that have been on that road. And I looked into the data, and there's 0 golf cart accidents that I could find. 0. In fact, not just on that road, but there's 0 golf cart accidents ever in Highland. And people in Highland have been driving these for years and years, driving them responsibly without any safety incidents that I could find in any data. So anyway, I would encourage us to think about, as we make a decision on this, think about freedoms and supporting freedoms and enjoying the liberties that we have in the community. And they do contribute in a meaningful way with families and connecting us with community. So thank you very much for listening.
Anyone else would like to come up and address the council? Okay, seeing none, we will now close the time for unscheduled public appearances. We're now moving to the first action item, which is action item number 2A, which is a public hearing and an ordinance for a PO zone amendment. We're going to turn, this is the land use and legislative. We'll turn the time over to Rob Patterson. We'll go through a presentation. Then we'll hear from the applicant, and then we'll have a public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. This is an item that's kind of been in the works for a little bit and reached a conclusion at the last Planning Commission meeting at the end of February, and now is here for your review and recommendation or opinion, one way or another. This is the professional office zone. We have 2 kind of areas of property. One is along Highland Boulevard, and I'm sorry for how blurry this is. I couldn't get it clear from our zoning map. So kind of Highland Boulevard as you go up below the church on the west side. And then there's one little parcel, the dentist's office, next to Lone Peak, just north of Wild Rose there. Both of those are zoned professional office. This PO zone was created in kind of a 2002-2003 process. There was an annexation of the Sunset Mountain property. It's when Highland Boulevard was planned as part of the connection going south. And it was master planned at the inception, somewhat like a PD, as we might have done it now. Back in the day, it was a little bit different. So there's both the zoning regulations, and then there's 3 exhibits that were part of the PO zone: a master site plan, a master landscaping plan, and then for the 7 or so buildings shown in the master plan, kind of our elevations and specific design details requirement for those buildings. These are the purposes of the PO zone, kind of summarized from the code. It's create an attractive commercial zone for office type activities and uses that does not include retail. That's me summarizing kind of the overall PO zone uses. To promote development in harmony with the open rural atmosphere of Highland, to promote architecture with residential flavor and avoid industrial prefabricated appearances, and allow some flexibility of architectural design. So again, PO zone was adopted in 2003. It was expanded to those to a little bit further north to the property just south of the church on Highland Boulevard. That was in 2007. And there's supposed to be like a senior housing or assisted living project that never kind of manifested there. And in 2018 is when the property next to Lone Peak was rezoned. The exhibits to the PO zone have been amended at least 3 times that I could find. 2005, there's expansion of the storage unit area for the Highland Hideaway. 2019-2020 was the flex office discussion, and then 2021 was the building that's still being built up there, Building 7 in there. These amendments did not always address the PO zone exhibits directly or necessarily even kind of show how they're supposed to relate to those prior exhibits. So it's been a little bit confusing how this zone is supposed to work with those exhibits. So here's that original exhibit. Again, this has been amended, I think, once or twice. It's hard to follow from the record fully. But this is the general plan. You'll see there's the buildings lined out there, and it sets out kind of the parking requirements, access areas, and general locations of all of these buildings. Exhibit B was the landscaping plan. And then Exhibit C, this is just an example of one of the buildings, Building 3, which is kind of the focus of this, but also more general. But it has 2 parts for each of those 7 buildings. The first part was a specification and like building material list. And then the second part was a rendering, an elevation showing kind of the concept of what the building should look like. So this was a text amendment that's been submitted by Patterson Homes that removes the kind of site-specific site plan, landscaping plan, and architectural design details. So those exhibits, it would remove all of those. And then change the PO zone text to remove, again, the references to those exhibits. It would provide a new architectural design exhibit saying, here are the themes that can be allowed in the PO zone generally. Would require all sites to be master planned, as they kind of were before, with some properties missing, for any new development. There's some screening of HVAC materials on the top buildings, more of clarifying how it works. Not really meant to allow for those things to be seen because no one wants to see them. Clarifying site plan requirements and clarifying some of the setback issues. These text amendments, as I've reviewed them, I didn't have much in the way of concerns about them. The big question, though, is the architectural design and how that should work going forward. So this was the original architectural design exhibit proposed by Patterson Homes that was presented to the Planning Commission last week. So during their review, they first had a hearing back in 2023 in July. It got continued, and they had more discussion of different, like they had a traditional, transitional, and modern style, and the Planning Commission gave suggestions of what they liked and didn't like. And the applicant spent some time reworking their plans and exhibits, and then they were ready to come back, but then I had some conflicts and we couldn't make the timing work, so it got delayed quite a while until now. February 25th, the Planning Commission reviewed the current proposal, discussed changes, and again, as I understood the Planning Commission, there weren't that many concerns with the text. It was mostly about what to do with these exhibits, especially some of the design requirements, such as like the 1-story limit for the 3 buildings on the east side of Highland Boulevard there. And there was a lot of discussion by the Planning Commission about building height. The PO zone allows a 35-foot building height. But again, some of the plan, like the site-specific designs for those buildings, impose an additional 1-story limit. So they'd have to comply with both 1-story, but also theoretically could go up to 35 feet. So the discussion about how to handle that. Eventually, we got to a motion, and it was a good discussion. We got to a motion. They moved the majority 6-1 to remove two of the examples from that exhibit, and I'll show you a picture of what those were. To replace with two examples of residential homes that have a more modern feel to them. And just, I had a conversation with the applicant. I don't think it was the intent of the commission saying those homes look like offices. It's more of those homes have a good kind of modern aesthetic to them that would be fine for a residential style modern office. So we're not trying to insult the residents. They have beautiful homes in Highland. The other thing the commission specified is that they wanted the previously approved master site plan to remain as the site plan for this development unless they go through a new master site plan process to amend it. Commissioner Abbott was the vote opposed, and I've summarized what my understanding of that, but you're welcome also to correct any of my mischaracterizations. It was most about the building heights, and especially on the east side where those were limited to 1 stories, and a lot of residents in that area bought into it with that understanding, should it be changed to that nature, to allow up to a 35-foot, 2-story, 3-story, whatever they could fit into it.
But the single story is 35 feet, right?
They could, I guess. I mean, this is a rather large building. It's just whether it's commercially feasible to do a large building that's 1 story.
And Rob,
yes,
that change that the Planning Commission made to the master site plan staying in effect, does that mean simply Exhibit A? So the Exhibit B, which is the landscaping, and Exhibit C, which had the site requirements, the materials, and the elevation, would not be?
This was, I think, the area of a bit of confusion with the commission. My understanding was they wanted all exhibits removed and then added this new one, but keep Exhibit A, that master site plan, only as the approved site plan. Now, whether that's the right approach or not is something the council's going to need to decide. And there was a little bit of confusion, I think, about what the motion really meant, but we didn't get a clarifying motion or a reconsideration. So I'm presenting the motion as I understood it, as listening to the recording again, how I could summarize it. So my understanding is the master site plan would stay as an administratively approved site plan, but it wouldn't include the landscaping plan or the Exhibit C, the building specific details. I was going to say with Commissioner Abbott, I believe you mentioned at one point that he liked some of these design changes, but would keep the architectural kind of the details with it, but replace the pictures essentially with these ones, if I recall correctly. Please, if I misstate your opinion, correct me. I don't want to. So these were the two examples. Councilmember Smith.
Yes. So, Mayor, if it's okay. So could you go back to the amendment, the change that was made in 2021, which allowed Building 7 that's being currently built now, which is 2 stories and a flat roof and quite a modernistic, different than any of the other architecture there. Because somehow or other, even though I was on the council, most of us were on the council. I just don't remember that coming to pass. So I was surprised when I drove up there and was looking around to see that building, because it seems like it's most consistent with the text amendment changes today than it was 3 years ago. So I just like to understand that better. And you and I talked about it, but I think the council would like to hear.
No, it's a great question, great thing to clarify. This is something that the council reviewed this and approved it in 2021. They approved the new building elevations for that building in 2021. However, the way it was somewhat presented, I think, was a bit not as clear to the council, and even my advice to the council wasn't as clear. The council and I at the time thought it was more of an administrative decision, meaning they had submitted an architectural plan, the planning commission had approved it, the council couldn't really change it because the commission was the land use authority up until recently for architectural design. So we all kind of treated it as it was a conditional use permit and architectural review. It's more of an administrative process. I wasn't aware of that Exhibit C with the building specific designs, and it really was more of a legislative decision that could have had more input on. So it was approved, but perhaps without a full understanding of what exactly was getting approved with that. So I'm trying to make sure we're really clear on the scope of what's being decided today. and trying to make.
Wouldn't that building be more consistent with these text amendment changes?
It would be. I think that
Because
building
it looks
would
more
align,
like the new exhibit.
It would align with the new exhibit, I think, perfectly well.
Yeah,
If that exhibit is to be adopted.
Did we ever see a picture of that building? It seems
No, and I'm with Scott. When I went there, I go, hold it, when do we approve? But from memory,
Yeah.
and Scott, you actually called. My understanding is when it came in 2021, we understood that the Planning Commission did all architectural design, and they had done that, and we really didn't have a say because that was their authority. So we approved, saying yes, that's the site, but it was going back. And what Rob Patterson's stating is, no, that was not administrative decision so much. We still had some oversight, but we did not understand at the time. Just reconfirm what you stated.
And I will also clarify, if you review the minutes, I told you it was an administrative decision. It was my understanding that's what it was. I didn't know these exhibits existed in terms of Exhibit C. They weren't presented to the council, and I wasn't fully aware of them. And I do apologize that I essentially misled the
So
council.
this is in the minutes. You were wrong.
I was wrong. And
okay.
Brittany Bills specifically asked whether this was a legislative decision. I told her no, and I'm very sorry for it. I truly am.
So now, Rob, as we go forward, the Planning Commission has approved some exhibits. Do they have that authority now? Do we still get to have a say?
They've made a recommendation.
Okay,
They have not made a final decision.
Okay. So this
and even when the building comes in, say this text amendment gets approved, the building still needs to be submitted. And with that land use table update, one of the things you changed the Planning Commission being the land use authority, the final decision maker. You changed it to them recommending architectural design and the council approving it. So you have broad
then
discretion
this would
here.
become administrative, though. If we change the design guidelines tonight, then if it goes back to Planning Commission, it would be administrative. So there would not be an option, really.
Correct. As long as it fell in line with the language of the PO zone and the exhibit, at that next meeting, it would be an administrative decision. But now it's a legislative decision. So you can say, we like this or we don't like this. We don't want any of this. It is a policy decision by the council.
Can I ask one more question for the public hearing? I apologize. So unfortunately, the audio with the Planning Commission was kind of messed up. And so I'm still not clear on what changes we're making to the landscaping plan. Could you just kind of maybe summarize that?
The landscaping exhibit is removed. So this exhibit is removed as part of the PO zone. In the text of the ordinance, there is still landscaping requirements regarding buffers and berming and setbacks. So we still have landscaping requirements. It's just not going to be necessarily specifically this landscaping plan.
What about the center meetings in the middle of the road?
Yeah, that was my next question.
Great question. As again, one of the things the Planning Commission said is the master site plan still remains in effect, and the master site plan, as I see it, still shows those medians going up. So we'd still require them to install those medians. And we've informed them, especially with that building 7 that's going in, they're not going to get a certificate of occupancy until the medians are completed. And they've acknowledged that repeatedly, and we have flagged their building permit on that matter. So medians are not supposed to go away. I don't think that was anyone's intent.
But is it clear where we don't have a landscape plan approved about the medians? I understand this shows medians. They can say, oh, and that's, would it be wise to put that, if we're doing a motion, to have that it includes in any landscape that they have to do the medians?
That would not be, that would be a wise thing to just clarify that that's not going to change going forward. I'm just making a note of that.
Okay, other questions, council, before? No.
I have a couple more things I just wanted to wrap up here quickly. So that was the change they recommended, removing those two. And with their master site plan, here's the language I've proposed adding in to address their concern about making the master site plan be the approved one, unless they go through the master site plan process again. So it references that Exhibit A and brings it forward into this, through this amendment. And then, so here is the kind of post-planning commission with those two changes. You'll see those two ones that were marked out before have been replaced with residential homes as examples of what a modern residential look could appear like for an office. So in my review, you'll see, if you look through the ordinance, you'll see there's a lot of different colors of the edits. That's because I went through a lot of different hands, including my own. We're comfortable with the text amendments, but the architectural design is up to the council. I can't really make a recommendation what you think the PO zone should look like. That is for the council to decide. Again, this is a legislative decision, so you have very broad discretion to approve, deny, put conditions on it, change it, and a public hearing is required. So that's all I have to present. We do have a representative of the applicant here as well. I advise you to have them present as well.
If it's, I'd recommend we have the applicant and then we have public hearing. Then we might have to. We'll have other.
Then let the applicant respond if there's something that comes up through the public.
So if the applicant's here, where's Ross Welch?
I'm not sure. I thought
If you'll state your name, please.
All right. Well, good evening, Council and Mayor. My name is Curtis Miner. I'm an architect. I've been asked by the Patterson companies to come and talk with you tonight about the proposed amendment to the PO zone. As Rob mentioned, we had a good conversation with the Planning Commission about a week ago. And so this presentation that I'm going to show is that presentation that we showed that night, with a few additions that I hope will clarify some of the questions that came up.
Will you just make sure to speak really good in the mic just so we can pick it all up?
Sure.
Just record it.
Yeah, okay. All right, so first, just a brief history of the PO zone. It was adopted in 2003. The purpose at the time was to these three items actually came out of the purpose statement: achieve a high quality, cohesive design for professional office development in Highland City. Number two, lend guidance to staff, the Planning Commission, and the City Council to review in the review and evaluation of future developments and projects related to professional office development, and allow some flexibility of architecture so as to encourage creativity of design. As has been mentioned, there were 3 exhibits added to the PO zone. Exhibit A was a site plan for a small group of properties on Highland Boulevard. B was a landscape plan, and C was an architectural building elevations. These elevations, incidentally, were drawn in the late 1990s or early 2000s. Currently, the PO zone, and this is kind of what we got into in the discussion with the Planning Commission, the PO zone is really it's written as a general zone, much as the other zones in the city are written to be applied to several different properties. But it's kind of acting like, by virtue of these particular exhibits, it's acting like a zone or a property-specific zone. So our approach in this was to try and make it more of a general zone so that it would be more appropriately applied to not only this property, but to other properties that currently have the PO zone and possibly others in the future. These are a couple of different things that kind of became the focus of about a 90-minute conversation with the Planning Commission. First, the first one is this line out of the introduction and purpose statement of the zone. It says, it's number 2, the overall intent of these regulations is to establish a standard for professional office and storage facility development and maintenance, which, B, promote architecture with residential flavor. So flavor is not really a technical term, typically. Back in the early 2000s, the late 1990s, I think it was reasonable to say that architectural residential flavor was gables and hips and things that were more traditional. Now, these are homes from Highland. One is in Saltaire Drive, Mountain Ridge Way, in Bull River, and Yorkshire Court. Each of these, of course, have a very kind of transitional or not even a modern sort of a feel. The second issue that came up with the Planning Commission is a discussion of the building height. The original attached site plan in Exhibit A, and the architectural building elevations called for 1-story buildings on some of the properties, particularly those that were on the east side of Highland Boulevard. In a contradictory statement inside the actual zone text, Section 3-4907 says the maximum height of a building in the professional office zone shall not exceed 35 feet. So we've got a 1-story building requirement on specific property, and we've got a 35-foot requirement on everything else in the zone. So just out of curiosity, I just did a quick study of the area. This is an aerial photograph taken from Google Earth of the area around the subject property. Now, these are the properties along the eastern side of Highland Boulevard. The closest home to that particular property is about 300 feet away. I did a quick diagram through that because I wanted to understand the impact of a 1-story versus a 2-story, and what type of a difference it would make in this 1-story versus 2-story discussion. So zooming in on that building, I've just diagrammed a quick building that might be, you might call it a 1-story residential with that 612 pitch, or even a 1-story residential with a 1212 pitch. You can see that regardless of the pitch, depending on how it's configured, that building could be 35 feet. And in fact, many of the buildings, the residential buildings that are immediately east of this, are 35 feet. The difference in height between the 1-story building with a 612 pitch and the 1-story building with a 1212 pitch is about 10.5 feet. And then if you were to go back to the point that is 300 feet away, the closest home, and measure the elevation difference that is created by that 10'6", it's about 2 degrees. And if you think of your field of view and the mountains that you see beyond, a 2-degree difference is really difficult to tell, particularly at 300 feet. So there was a pretty strong argument that 1-story building height was a pretty important factor in the original zone, and that needed to be maintained in this one as the zone goes forward. Our thought, though, is that in order to be fair and equitable, that to all the property developers, that removing the exhibit that requires the 1-story and allowing everything to go to 35 feet, just as the residential properties do, would be more appropriate and fair. Additionally, views, as you are well aware, are not protected unless there's a specific development code that protects view corridors. View, as long as the other factors and criteria in the zoning document are complied with, heights and setbacks and so forth, a view is not a protected right. So the purpose of this text amendment that we proposed is first to require a master site plan for all properties to ensure development is compatible with adjacent properties. Now, there was some discussion about this master site plan for the subject property, the original property that was part of the PO zone. That actually was originally Exhibit A, and now there's a discussion about we just pull that out of the actual zoning document and put it in place as a pre-approved site plan for this particular property, which would be subject to any sort of the normal process to go through any sort of an amendment. Number two, we would propose requiring compliance with an updated architectural design standards, the new Exhibit A that we showed just a minute ago. And number three, removing references to site-specific and outdated design guidelines, the previous Exhibits A, B, and C. And then fourth, as Rob mentioned, making technical edits and adjustments to better conform with other Highland City code sections. This will allow the PO zone to be used in other locations in Highland City. One other quick note, incidentally, he mentioned that there's another piece of property that is located over by the high school. That actually has the building in the top right is located on that property. And just as the other building that you're referring to on the Patterson parcel does not comply with the current exhibits, neither does that one. And that also was approved in the PO zone. So already we're seeing some pretty significant inconsistencies between the exhibits that exist as a part of the PO zone and what's actually been happening for the last little while. So this was the exhibit that was submitted to become the architectural standard for the PO zone. You can see that it has a variety of different architectural styles, anywhere from gables to more of a traditional, bottom centers, more of a traditional approach, to more of a modern or kind of a transitional type where you've got a lot of stepping and movement, both in the vertical plane and in the horizontal direction. And then middle left, of course, is the original Patterson building. And even though that looks like a 1-story building, that's actually a 2-story building. And the building right above it is actually a 1-story building, even though it's 35 feet high, which kind of underscores this problem with the 1-story versus the 35 feet. As a result of the Planning Commission hearing, they recommended that we change the top center and the bottom left buildings to be these residential buildings that are actually located in Highland. So we've now made that swap, and this is the exhibit that came as a result of that conversation with the Planning Commission. So that was the original. This is the Planning Commission's recommendation. So with that, we'd hope that you'd consider carefully the proposal to amend the PO zone. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, can we ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a picture of the final product of building that's being built on now on Building 7? It's on the west side. It's partially built.
The one that's partially built?
Flat top, 2 stories.
I don't have a copy of that here.
Okay. Does it fit with one of these architectural plans?
It would be more consistent with more of the contemporary style, from what I understand. Yeah.
Right. And in the packet, it talks about all this was a discussion for Building 3 on the east side of Highland Boulevard. Do you have any exhibit of Building 3? Obviously, which one are you thinking about?
The Building 3, the current design for Building 3 is actually in the middle center.
Right in the center.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that question. This whole conversation started as an attempt to get an approval to build Building 3. It became pretty apparent that due to the exhibits that were part of the PO zone, that really was going to be impossible, because included in the PO zone exhibits were those elevation drawings from 1998, I think is when they were drawn. So that really became the impetus for this discussion, this long discussion about how to make the PO zone more appropriate for current design and for current building development that wasn't tied to something that was happening nearly 20 years ago. So as a result of that entire process, we've come to tonight where we're proposing, again, that this PO zone be made more of a general document that can control design on a lot of different properties in Highland City, and that it give a little bit more design flexibility than having an actual building elevation in the PO zone.
So can I just ask about this building
Sure.
again? So as you go up Highland Boulevard, you have the 2 Patterson offices, which are more kind of traditional from 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you want to build this building as Building 3? Is it just more space? Is it just, I mean, obviously it's more updated by architecture, but why wouldn't you want to build it like the other 2 buildings?
Good question. So the building, the first Patterson building, the one that is further south, is actually middle center
Right.
left center. So that building, which our firm actually designed several years ago, it was actually modeled after the exhibits that are part of the PO zone. And it's not an exact copy, but it was approved, and it was built more as a 1-story building with a roof that starts from the main level, but then it's got second level space up inside the attic, what would be called the attic. So that building worked for them now at that point in time. It really, from a design standpoint and from an efficiency standpoint, is very inefficient. It doesn't really work that well from a, if you were to try and build something like that right now in today's market with, the real estate constraints and other factors, it would be really difficult to get that to work. The one in the center really does a much better job at trying to take advantage of some simplified building methodology and take advantage of some of the different things that we can do in stacking stories and stacking walls, bearing walls, and so forth.
So I have a question about the center building. Are you anticipating it having a basement?
It does have a lower level on the backside.
Is that lower level going to be office use, or will it be more of a storage type of use?
As I understand it, the intent is for office space.
It's not meant to be man caves?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I don't know.
Well, okay, what is common is to have a garage area for, if you want to say a person to be able to come and park a car to work on.
Yeah.
And then they have kind of a TV or kitchen area and maybe a movie room at that, different things that way. I was wondering if that's what this design was with the way the hill was going to be.
Yeah, I do know that there's not a way to get a vehicle down there. It would be serviced by steps, and there'd be maybe some doors or a walkout area in the backside, but it's not the type where you can drive a vehicle in. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
We
might have you come back up after we hear some.
Okay, I'll leave that there just in case.
At this time, we'd like to go ahead and open it up for a public hearing on this item. If you'll please come and state your name and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
I'm Alex Bean. Thanks for your service and listening to us today. I moved to Highland about 4 years ago, and I am that house that he went and did the 300 feet. I assure you I have beehives that are closer than 300 feet to where he's talking about. I actually paid a fair amount of money for the lot, put millions into the house. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on trees and property and everything to that side in Bull River, which is my neighbors here. And Bull River prides itself on keeping this natural look and feel. That is why we bought the property. In our design, we had to go through a rigorous, ultimately to fit the look and feel of the neighborhood. If you come to the house, you will see a giant window right out front as you walk up our stairs. And that window will look directly into this office, especially where it's at. It could be farther down south towards the road, but it's not. It's up right by our entrance. It will look directly into my boys' room, so that second floor does matter. Walking up the stairs and into my kids' room. I want to be clear. I'm pro-business. I had a conversation with my daughter today. I said, man, there's so much construction in Highland. And I go, pros and cons. And she's like, what are the pros? And I'm like, well, it just means you have a great economy and there's businesses and jobs and people building homes. That's great. Like I can see 10 bulldozers outside of my house right now. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. That's part of a growing economy. But when we bought the house, it was intended for a single floor so we could have the view for the sunset. It will quite literally be blocking that second story is pretty significant to us. So that's where a lot of my passion comes from. I would love for it to be farther south, closer to the other buildings. I think you could get away with hiding it away from the neighborhoods if you did that. And also, if you want to look at Patterson's record on following their master plan, look at the median. It has been there. It is concrete. There's no landscape. It is dirt. They've done nothing to beautify that area in a way that would show me that their intent is to make this a positive thing for Highland. Whereas I would suggest I've spent significantly more than them on my personal bank account to make Highland pretty. All those stupid Christmas lights are us, sorry. But those trees, and we just want it to be a pretty neighborhood and a great spot. I welcome the business. I'm excited for business to come. For me, it's the 2 stories is really important. I think it should go back to the Exhibit C, which was the approved. The reason that they got the master plan was so that it could stay, I would assume 20 years ago when they put that exhibit in, the reason they got the approval is that it would stay residential flavor and single story. And I think that needs to be adhered to. So thank you.
My name's Brendan McClellan. I own the 4 acres that's kind of behind building 1 and 2. I met with Patterson Construction, as did the Homeowners Association for Bull River, when they first proposed what they were going to do with this property. The suggestion of it being a professional building was my own. As a low-use, day-use, professional type building that would have a residential flavor, that would specifically even brought up that it would look kind of like a duplex house. Patterson was quite enthusiastic about it at the time because they didn't think we would be positive about a commercial development. They were talking about putting houses there. So my neighbors agreed with me that it would be a lower impact on the neighborhood to have a day-use professional building. Of course, I'm not thrilled with the idea of having a building that doesn't look like the original buildings that were proposed, which the first 2 buildings were. And while they show the elevations of the proposed buildings from the street side, we have to look at it from behind. So for me already, the 2 buildings that are already built are 3 stories. I know they're not above the ground, but the side that I see it, they're 3 stories above ground. So same impact when they're talking about adding additional stories. They're basically making a 3-story building from our view that we have to look. Now, when they minimize it with a part of that being a roof, being a peaked roof, even if there's occupancy and windows in that space, when they talk about making it in a block, that does not look like a residence. There might be some nice houses that are done that way in modern architecture, but that's not what it looks like around in our space. That's not what we find attractive. That's not what we originally agreed on several decades ago. I also attended every single meeting at the city council as these decisions were being made. This was all made clear to and agreed on. So these changes that are being proposed are counter to what we agreed as neighborhood and residents of Highland to what would allow them to put professional buildings in the first place. The excuse of, well, it's not cost-effective way for us to do it now. They've had multiple decades to build the building in that original style and have chose not to. So changing it so it's convenient for them, but it's unpleasant for us, does not seem like a reasonable proposal to me at all. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tracy Barnes, and my house is just north of this property. And I agree with Alex Bean that it should be lower. I mean, he built his house there thinking that it was a one-story. I bought a house that has a view right there thinking it would be a one-story. But I also have some other questions. I'm looking on page 36 of the thing. Do you guys all have that? So right now they're working on building 7. But building 5 was a much smaller building originally. And so it was building 4 combined with building 5 into that bigger building. So building 4 is still going to exist, right? And that is okay to be a 3-story, and then the building 6 is a 3-story. Is that correct? Rob, do you know?
Rob, I think my question is on the diagram on page 36 is building number 4 and building number 6 are still contemplated, correct?
Sorry, I was pulling it up. I accidentally
sorry.
on my packet.
We can go back. Keep going.
Yeah, okay. So I just wondered what their situation is, because that's a hill that kind of goes up. So are the buildings going to end up 35 feet at the elevation at the top of that hill, or 35 feet at the elevation of the bottom of the hill? There's a hill that kind of goes up. It goes up a berm, and then TI is on the other side of it.
So I can answer those. Yes, those 2 buildings are still coming in. They're still part of the approved plan for that area.
Do you know, when I say elevation, I'm not talking about the architectural look of the outside of it. I'm talking about the actual elevation, because it comes down a hill. So will that hill be built out with a big retaining wall, or will they bring the dirt in?
I don't know exactly how they'll propose it. They're allowed 35 feet from finished grade. And that's usually measured from the higher place on the lot.
Okay.
So that's why you have, like, I forgot the last resident who just spoke. It's from the top of grade, you might have 1 story, but it'll go down below grade. But you'll see more of it because if it slopes down, our building height regulations allow that.
Okay. So it could be at the higher dirt level and then be 35 up.
Correct.
Which would really block my sunset view. So I'm against it. But so as far as elevation goes, like the outside of it, the way that it looks, building 3, if it's a really modern look, doesn't go with the other 2 buildings that are there. It's going to be very odd and different. It just seems like even if they change the look of what they have right now, I saw the drawing of it, and it is kind of a little bit funky, but even if they changed it to be a little bit more cohesive to the other 2 buildings, that to me makes more sense. And to keep it as a 1-story, it makes more sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Hello, Council and Mayor. Appreciate again your service for being here and all that you do. It takes time to do that. I'm Manuel Bueno, and I live just north of Tracy at 11243 Brittany Circle. My general concern is that why do we need an amendment to the PO zone when it's worked, at least, for the residents more? One of the concerns I have is if we change that, does that eliminate the conditional use permit process? When the office warehouse building, I call it warehouse, not flex space, because it is warehouse. In fact, in the original proposal, it was called office warehouse. And then after there's a bit of an uproar, they changed it to flex space. And, but through that process, the citizens were able to get involved like this. And in my opinion, we as a city, the developers still got their property, they still got their office warehouse, but it became a much better looking and better product from the very first iteration that they sent. And so my concern is, why do we even need this? And frankly, it's kind of a concern that a developer is approaching the city to change zoning laws versus the city considering it and proposing something that's in the city's opinion better. And then as far as the argument to bring these changes to bring the architecture into current modern state, we do have that building that was approved that's being built right now that's very, very modern. And somehow that I must have missed the conditional use permit for that. I didn't get one in the mail. And I think as a separate note, I would encourage you to go back, Mayor, to look at what's the current notification for conditional use permits. I think it was cut down. I think we need to spread that out a little bit more so that more residents are actually made aware of those permits. But we all know what residential is, and even a modern residential versus a commercial modern. And so we can use the current laws with the architecture of modern and get through that. On the plan, the change, it just shows something north of the buildings there to the church, which now just says open space. So my question is, what does that mean? Is that going to be a park now? And that's that. Also, the strips we talked about, when the Flex building was approved, they agreed to do that, and it was never done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is David Barnes. Again, I just live just north of and across from the new commercial building there. And two things. I just want to address the medians. That's a major boulevard, and we had to, as a stake, clean up that area because it looks so lousy. And the one median that Patterson has done, they just put concrete in the middle of it, and that's all it is concrete. So I would hope that when you do the medians, that they're decorative and are going to look a lot better than the median that he did before. So I hope that you guys require that of him. And I guess the other thing that I would just address is that obviously we bought our home. We spent multi-million dollars for our home, and unbeknownst to us that they had the property being built right across from us, and then we lived with all their dust for years and years as a result of that construction. And now I know views are not protected, but the quality of our value of our home is directly impacted by the lack of views that existed. And for some reason, instead of putting the power lines below ground, I don't know who approved that, but these big power lines now come in our view, and I know that's not Patterson's deal, but anyway, for quality of the city and for having the architecture match what's already there, we would really appreciate your vote in keeping it a low level building. Thank you.
Hi, Jerry Abbott, 11187 North Tamarack in Bull River. I just wanted to clarify a couple things, just so you guys are completely informed. I was here when they first came in to deviate from the master plan that was approved. I thought it was great. Like, when I bought my place, I was told that was all going to look residential and be this way, and I went and looked at the master plan, and it was great. Patterson came in and made the argument that it was a financial hardship on them, that to build those buildings were inefficient and not cost effective, and basically asked us for some leniency, and that's how that other building gets built, right? And so it kind of hurts when he comes in and uses it against us that we didn't look how these have been built now. You guys haven't even followed your own thing. Well, that was a request that they had. They came to us and asked if we could deviate a little bit from it, and then the neighborhood was able to get involved. And the building that's being built, Scott, that you were mentioning, I wasn't here when that went through the Planning Commission, or I would have addressed it. The idea was it was supposed to still look residential. That's why I asked to replace those pictures, because those were his pictures he brought. Make it look like this. The buildings that are there look like the buildings that you pull off of the freeway, those big boxy things with the cut in. It looks commercial. I don't see any flavor of residential. Take flavor off. It still says residential looking. And the reason I picked those two was the whole building's not two-story. It's stepped. There was a two-story portion, a single, and it looks really nice. If it could look like that, residential, it'll fly. And what's happened on the other street, none of it's really happened, but what happened is we accommodated them. They deviated from it. And then in our Planning Commission meeting, you guys know when the meetings go long, things get frustrating. And Thane was making a proposal, and we were kind of all agreeing on it. But then I asked Rob, will this go away? Which tells you that it has to be a single-story building, the square footage. Because originally, they just came in, the first meeting was just about architecture and landscape. It wasn't about rewriting the PO zone. And the fact that you don't, they talk about view sheds. Patterson came to us on the Longhorn property for Bull River and said, hey, we're going to put in office buildings and we'll make them all single level. That's controlling the view. When that came in for PO, they're the ones that presented that plan and put the one story there. It wasn't forced on them. They're the ones that presented it to get the neighborhood to allow that to go to the PO. So I have a place in Salt Lake, and they can't block my view. They can't build buildings to block views. So when he says that you don't own views, they're entitled to do through that process. I'm just going to take a few more minutes just because of the Planning Commission part. Thank you. So that was the confusion. What we were trying to work towards was, hey, let's narrow down the architecture so that next time if I'm not there, somebody who hasn't been through the process, it spells out, needs to look residential, stepped, whatever. The landscaping, can come back through and look, but we wanted to keep the written part, those exhibits. He came up and said, oh, it's conflicting. It's not conflicting. It applies to that building, which was probably accepted when the zoning was approved. What I don't want to have happen is have them come through, because we were acceptable to those office buildings going, single level along the other side of Bull River and the Longhorn property. But now I'm seeing they're going to come back, 10 years later and say, oh, this is going to go to two-story now. And so, yeah, you have a zone, but you also have, when you have leverage, the city does, when you rezone something, you can put other things on there to make the neighborhood happy. You can, like for us, they were going to put the fence along there, give us a gate, all this other stuff. And when that northern part started being developed, one of the neighbors goes, where's the fence? I said, they don't have to do that. They're doing it by right. It's only when there's a rezone. And so kind of loosening them up that property could be more than just, 1 acre lots. But that was the confusion at the Planning Commission. Afterwards they came up and talked to Rob and they go, do these go away? And he said, yeah. And they go, oh, that's not what we thought was going on. But that's why I was a no. I was fine with the architecture, the exhibits that were there, the landscaping, but that what they presented stayed, where it says the square footage, the height of the building. And yeah, they want to go to a two-story, but because they'll say, it maximizes their profit. Well, they've owned the property the whole time. They're the ones that presented the master plan. And I don't think it's unreasonable to hold that portion, but allow for the architecture. So anyway, that's all I have.
Okay, council will bring it back with some.
I'm
sorry, Liz wanted to. Sorry, Liz.
It's okay. Liz Rice, 26-year resident. So when I sat on the Planning Commission all those years ago, we battled this, and we wanted it to be residential looking. And I really like what Patterson has. In the renderings, I sat through Planning Commission as well, and I know what my eye goes to, And, you know, the squarer you get, the flatter you get, there's no character there. And if you read studies about character and architecture, it has an influence on a community, speed zones, all that kind of thing. So I would like it to stay one, like what we planned all those years ago, one level, make it look residential. I also have a real issue with flat roofs. And I don't know, I honestly can't say I looked on this when I went home from Planning Commission, and I didn't see where we have to have heated roofs on a flat roof. But I remember when, and I know that people think that our climate is changing and everything, but I remember when buildings were collapsing in Farmington. And there's a reason why we have a pitch that we do on the roof. And it really is attractive, in my opinion. I really appreciate what the Planning Commission did at the last meeting, but that's really all I had. It's just a concern about that flat roof thing. It's a little worrisome. We you know, and Highland Boulevard gets a lot more snow than what we get over here. I don't know if you've ever driven up there in a snowstorm, but it's a little rowdy. So thank you.
Is there anyone else like to come up and address the council? Okay, seeing none at this time, we will close our public hearing. We'll bring it back for comments and questions from the council.
Councilmember Smith, I'd like,
go
for
ahead.
the benefit of, this was the plan that was approved for that building 7 as part of the overall site plan back in 2021. So there's the rendering of it. And then the actual building design, more or less the same with some tweaks to the.
That goes back how far?
This 2021.
This is 2021 that this was approved.
21.
So, in your opinion, Rob, does that look residential?
Is it based on people's opinion?
There are some residences that look like that, but I mean, it's definitely not your traditional residential look. State that the majority of homes in Highland have that more traditional with, the roof lines that are more traditional homes. This doesn't have that. Whether that is, with the more transitional that you're seeing with some of the newer developments in Highland, whether that's something you want to incorporate and allow that's the council's opinion, not mine.
Okay.
So here's a question. I have a couple of questions. There'll probably be others follow up. We're talking about the PO zone, and we have a development over on 4800 West. You mentioned across from the high school.
Correct.
That one has a building that was in our exhibit that does have a flat roof. Now we're talking about the PO zone now over on Highland Boulevard. Are both these zones, are we saying that the PO zone is what this has changed? Or can we be very specific saying the Highland Boulevard PO zone's this? Or is it, no, you've already agreed to that type of flat roof over in that PO zone, so it's pretty hard to say over in this PO zone it's different.
This is the difference between kind of a legal precedent and more of just what you've done and whether you want to be consistent with it. Because you could say no more flat roofs going forward in the PO zone, period. And that building's already built. It is what it is. So you could just say going forward, or you can even specify in areas different type of restrictions. So you don't have to incorporate that existing building. You said it is what it is at this point and just leave it be. Or you can choose to incorporate it into the PO zone if you'd like. It really is up to the council.
The Planning Commission was one of the drawings that they brought in, had the building over on 4800 West, correct? The one on the...
That was from the applicant's original proposal, okay. So this is their original. So that top right corner here, so that's the building over by Lone Peak. So that's in the PO zone.
Rob, this is just an education question for me. Making sure that I'm understanding things right. If we were to require a sloped roof in the zone, then that building would become a non-conforming use. It would be perfectly legal. If they were to demolish it and redo it, it would have to conform to the new standards.
Correct.
Is that okay? Thank you.
But if modeled it and had an addition to it, would they have to put a pitched roof on it?
I'd have to review our non-conforming ordinance. I believe it does say that if you add on to a non-conforming building, you're supposed to bring the entire building up to spec.
Okay.
So the PO zone does have regulations on roof styles and prohibits certain roof styles. Flat roofs are not prohibited currently in the PO zone.
Yeah,
I'll say they're not prohibited by the text. For those buildings that had a very specific design, I would say they have been prohibited.
Okay, so Rob, on Exhibit A that you have here that we were just talking about, what's the height limit? Is that 35 feet?
It's about 32. It kind of slopes up a little bit. So at the peak, it's about 32 feet.
So my question is, in this single story that we keep over on building number 3, it is stating that it can be up to 35 feet. So even though the concern is saying, hey, we don't want a 2-story building, that even if they decide to do one story, they, like you're saying, they could go higher if it be with gables or other up to now. I kept asking, where's the 35 feet? Are we measuring it from here in the drive, like the parking lot? Is it off the back of the building? Since this one has a slope, but I'm talking specifically building number 3 has a slope. How would that be measured? From the highest point down to where?
It's from the highest point of finished grade.
So
right.
Pick the hill, wherever you're going to level it. There's some averaging that goes on, but it basically says it's measured from one location along any elevation where the grade of building to the highest point of the building is at its greatest vertical difference. When there's a slope, you average it to not exceed 35 feet. In practical event, we have to look exactly where it falls on a slope. So it's not going to be measured from the lowest point. We'd have to look at the finished grade overall and average it out to 35 feet high.
Can I just make a comment? There's a couple things that I guess my memory is getting bad or something, but I hope not. I usually have pretty good memory about what's happened on the councils before. So when we talked about on Highland, on 4800 West or North County Boulevard, that area across from the high school being zone PO, I don't remember there being a discussion ever when we referred back to the architecture on the other side of the city. And I think we just kind of thought it was kind of its own entity. So it makes sense to be consistent, of course. But at the same time, sometimes I think we're making assumptions about the Sunwall building, which is up in the right-hand corner, when we didn't even use that in conjunction with what the architecture was on the other side of the. We never discussed that. I know we never discussed that. Can anybody remember discussing that?
I reviewed the minutes as well, and there was no discussion. It wasn't in the staff report. Those exhibits just weren't a consideration. It was the text of the PO zone was applied, and we said, yeah, this kind of matches those requirements, but none of those other exhibits.
And the building number 7, I know I'm kind of hung up about it because I was kind of surprised when I went and drove by it, and I appreciate your looking it up. I'm going to have to go back and look at that because I can't imagine that I sat here in the council and saw the plans for that building and have no recollection of it.
Those plans
and have no recollection of ever agreeing to it.
That building did?
Yes.
So I don't know how that got by me, and the mayor doesn't remember it either. We were both on the council then.
We're both getting old.
In fact, Brittany and Kim, you had to be on the council then in 21. Do you remember that being presented to us?
Just because I'm younger doesn't mean my memory's any better than yours.
Okay, even though you're much younger and okay. But I just don't remember.
I don't remember, to be honest.
So I think we're making decisions sometimes on, poor memory or we're not coordinating things, and I appreciate it. But if we change the whole PO zone and make everything the same, if the Longhorn property all comes in and they want a big PO zone, as Jerry Abbott was saying, then all the things we agreed to today in this amendment would affect all of that. Is that right? And so I think we have to be careful what we do because as I've been on the council over the years, I find the following. Sometimes I'm really in favor of something. There was what we called the Peck property on the west side of Highland. It was 3-acre area. We agreed to let them have a big outbuilding, but we didn't, and that was okay, and I was very for that, but I didn't realize that my neighbor, 3 houses would away from me or that would build a building twice the size of his house using that. So I think we have to be careful the decisions we make because it has a lot of ramifications in the future. So I'd kind of like to look at this a little bit more and maybe hear more from what the rest of the council says because I'm a little uncertain that I want to vote on changing all the PO zone requirements that affects the rest of the city, and because we'll have some more PO zones. So I guess I'm just asking if we can have more discussion, and I've said my deal. Okay.
Mainly one clarification. Building height is defined differently throughout the code for different zones. They actually are proposing streamlining building height to be the same as other zones, but it would remove that averaging factor from their text proposal. So if you wanted to make it clear where 35 feet should be measured from, that's something that we could do as part of the zone of saying it's measured from an average or the lower point or a higher point. That's something we could address as part of this.
My concern is that it's always been a 35-foot max, whether it's 1 story or 2. I had a home in Sandy, beautiful home with a 14-on-12 roof. I'd never heard of it until I bought this home. It was 14-on-12. It's 1 story on the outside, and it's 35 feet tall. So yes, it could be done. And I understand the argument on flat roofs. I was on years ago on a school parent group, that advisory group for a new school in Springville, and we required a pitched roof, and we got it. It's one of the few schools in Utah that has a pitched roof on it. It's a tile roof. So I understand that argument, but I don't know I have a little bit of discomfort having a developer buy some property and we have certain rules and then we start changing the rules. And he's got an investment in a $3 or $4 million building, and we say we want a pitched roof now, and then he wants to, remodel it, and he's going to have to go to a pitched roof. That just seems overreach. It seems like government overreach. It bothers me. It just really bothers me. So the 35-foot rule has always been there. So by going 2 stories, we're not changing that 35-foot rule. It's already there. We're not changing the potential for a view. Now, the likelihood that you'd build a 1-story, well, I've seen it. It's a 14-on-12 roof. And it looks, by the way, beautiful. And it is residential. I mean, that was a home. So anyway, I have issues. I really appreciate and understand the flat roof problem. I really pushed hard. I was the chairman of that little parent advisory thing for the new school. And it's Art City Elementary, and if you go there, it's beautiful, and it's got a pitched roof. And I know they're not going to have to replace that roof after 30 years with a full new roof. They may have to retile it, but that's quite a bit different than changing an entire roof when it's flat. And they always leak. I don't care how well they're built. Every time there's something going through it, it's going to leak.
They always leak. You're right.
They always do. So I understand it, and I appreciate it, but I don't want to get into this government overreach realm where we do everything that we think is right, and yet we're infringing on people's rights. And a developer is a developer, does have rights. I know it's easy to hate developers and be against them, and the residents don't like them, and it's a constant battle, but they have rights. And if we start imposing changes on what they've already invested in, I just have a hard time with that.
So Ron, I just want to so I make sure I understand. So this developer bought the property with the 1-story, 35 feet, but what you're saying is the 35 feet because it could be.
That's the thing I wouldn't change. Okay. I wouldn't change the 35 feet, but the 1-story to 2-story, I don't see the difference. Okay. But we could even go so far as to say, okay, do a 12-on-12, 14-on-12 roof, and put your 2nd story within that, so it would look no different than my home in Springville. In Sandy. It wouldn't look any different than that. It would look residential. It's got a nice pitched roof on it. We can impose that. I'm not sure I want to, but I'm just saying those are some of the options I think we have, because it's already 35 feet. So it is a conflict. I'm sorry, but it is. It's not likely you're going to build 1-story 35, but if we allow a 2nd story within a pitched roof, then it's a win-win. Because the 35 feet's already there.
Okay. Other council members?
I guess I see where Ron's coming from. The main reason why we don't want a 2-story is, from what I heard from residents, is blocking their view. But we're still not changing the height. There's a 35-foot height. So I guess then what is the opposition to two-story versus one-story if the height is still not changing. So that's just a question that we have to think about.
Three things. First of all, I believe that we absolutely have to change our ordinance. I believe that it does not work for locations that are not one of the planned set, that space immediately south of the church. I don't believe that our ordinance works for that. So I believe that we have to make some change. Two, I don't have any objection to the text changes or the exhibit, the architectural styles. I'm okay with those. Some of them would not be my personal choice, but I have either a really bad or a really unique aesthetic sense, depending on how you look at it. And so I personally would prefer not to impose my odd aesthetic sense on others. So third thing, what does give me heartburn with this is that the developer made a proposal, brought it to the city. There was some back and forth, but that proposal was approved and written into our code. And now, with discussion primarily around architectural styles, it appears that we're wanting to change other items, such as allowing a two-story building. I will be in favor of approving this if we limit buildings that front onto the east side of Highland Boulevard to one story. If we add in the piece that we had talked about earlier about requiring the landscaping in the medians. And the third item, which just came up, and I had not thought about it or noticed it before, but changing back to the average for determining height from grade.
Mayor, can I ask a question of Councilman Carney? So are you saying that you would support these changes if we kept Building 3, which is on the east side, down at one story? Are you saying that?
It would,
but the other side, on the west side, which is Building 7, which is already 2 stories and flat roof that they're building, and then there's two other buildings in there that they could have different architectural style and things? Or are you just saying we ought to maybe focus on Building 3? Or
with regard to the one-story requirement, I would limit that to buildings 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 already being built, but if we require that one story, then even if they're demolished and rebuilt, they would still have that one story.
Okay, so you'd say that for Building 3.
Saying anything on the east side of Highland Boulevard would have a one-story requirement.
Yes, which today, as a practical matter, means Building 3.
But the other side, you could do that.
Yeah, and I believe that the other side, the exhibits that are already in Exhibit C, I believe they are already listed as 2 stories.
So it feels to me like if we were to approve all of the changes, then what can happen is Patterson can then come back. Their current plan is approved, but they will be able to come back under these new set of rules to the Planning Commission, at which point it would be administrative and there wouldn't be really an option for Planning Commission to not approve. Correct, Rob?
Correct, as long as they met with these restrictions and were generally within the architectural exhibit.
So I'm totally fine with changing some of the exhibits. I don't know as I have particularly good taste when it comes to architecture, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. I agree with Doug, though, that agreement was signed, and I remember that process. And what was it, 2019 or 2021 when we went through
2019. I don't remember the process in 2021 for some reason.
2019, yeah, in 2019. But I remember having the conversations with these residents, and I remember, wasn't it Brian Braithwaite who kind of scheduled some meetings and worked with you to come to an agreement? So I remember a considerable amount of work and compromise going into that, and so I'm less willing to throw that work away. I understand Councilmember Campbell's point about government overreach, and the 35 standard has always been there, but this has been an agreement that has been there as well. So to me, changing that at this point would be more egregious, I guess. So I like Councilmember Courtney's idea of requiring that one story on those east side,
which is building 3.
Which is building 3 and 1 and 2, should they be remodeled. I would be interested, I don't know what the process is going to be for this. I would be interested in talking more to Planning Commission. It sounds like there was some confusion at the meeting. It was hard for me to understand because of the way the audio was. So I would hate to do anything tonight as City Council that ties the hand of Planning Commission later, which I feel like this would do.
Can I ask a clarification on the Planning Commission? Did have a motion. Did that motion include 2 stories on the east side? 6-1 vote? Because we have the 1 vote here.
So the motion did not. The motion
it?
removed the 3 exhibits, which would have removed that 1-story restriction on the east side. I cannot say with 100% certain that the commission understood that was the result of their motion.
Yeah.
We had a very long discussion. It ended up being late, and
Ron,
I tried to explain it, but I don't know if we got there.
I think it was unclear at the time that changing this would basically automatically change the ability to build a 2-story. That's my understanding from me is.
Okay.
I would be curious to know what the other planning commissioners.
To be clear,
thought after that meeting.
the vote of the Planning Commission, because I served on it for 5 years, means a lot to me. If it's a 6-1 vote, and I appreciate Jerry, I really do, but it was 6-1 on a different opinion. So I'm going to side unless I have a reason not to. And sometimes there's reasons not to, and I get that. But I really weigh heavily the recommendation. So I'm wondering if we should continue this and let the Planning Commission go back and clarify this, and let the developer go to the Planning Commission, get this down, and get a recommendation, 4-3, 5-2, 6.
Well, but let me ask
7-0.
They've already. What would we be having Planning Commission do? Because they've already heard this. They voted on it and moved it to us as a recommendation. So what would we be having the Planning Commission?
I guess they could revisit their recommendation.
But I don't.
Ultimately, it's up to the council to make the final call regardless.
It was a 6-1 vote, and what we have here, Jerry's not here representing the Planning Commission.
Correct.
Because it was a 6-1. He's representing Jerry. So they voted to remove the 1-story requirement, but did they really want to do that? We don't know that. That's what I'd like to get clarification on.
Right.
If they, whatever that vote ends up being, could it be revisited?
I guess the question for the council. So let's assume they said, yes, we were knowing that they wanted to remove and we wanted to allow 2 stories. Does it matter to you? Because what I've been hearing from the council, that I'm just trying to get about the council. We can go back. Does that change in how you want to vote?
Well, I agree with Doug's compromise, but let me just say this. This PO zone now extends north of the Flex building to the church. So there's a long section there that anything we vote on is affected. So you could put all these 2- and 3-story buildings all along Highland Boulevard up to the church, and there's a lot of room there. So I think we just have to make sure that we understand what our vote is doing long term, because sometimes we do things on the council and don't understand the long-term ramifications. Now, we can't guess all of that, but sometimes I think we know right now where the rest of the PO zone, and we also know where there's going to be some more PO zones, probably. So we have to ask ourselves, do we want 2-story buildings? Do we want flat roofs? Do we want this modern farmhouse architecture, what they call solidar and all that stuff? If that's what we want, I think we have to just kind of think that through a little bit before we vote.
And could I ask Chris Howden, Chris, did you recognize that you're removing the one story?
Would you like to have Chris come up and address
You
it?
bet.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another council member here, Chris Howden, or
He's the chair of the Planning Commission.
No, is he the chair?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, we'd like to.
I'd like to hear his voice.
Good evening, everybody. Chris Howden. I think it was pretty clear to at least me, and if you listen, I know the audio was a bit mucked up, but there was a long-winded discussion. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I retract that. We had a healthy, educational, active discussion about if it's 35 feet high and a pitched roof, or if it's 35 feet high and it's just a sort of Soviet block-style architecture, does it really matter? And unfortunately, Scott, as we all feel the pain every time we drive past the golf course in your neighborhood, 35 feet is high. And so at least to me, I can't speak for the other 5 members, it was very clear that we removed the, I'm tempted to say 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, but whether it was 1 story or 2 stories, that we were removing the story, whether it's 1 or 2 stories, that was being removed. And at least from my personal point of view, which you should disregard because I'm just one person, the current top left-hand corner is probably the most unsightly from an aesthetic, personal point of view. If you ask me to put on the Planning Commissioner chair hat, if you have any doubts, I think the Planning Commission would be very amenable to having a mandate from council saying, can you clarify, did you mean 1 story or did you mean 2 story? And is that without regard to the 35 feet or does it include the 35 feet? Just so that it provides some clarification without us guessing as to what we're all thinking.
Can I ask a quick question of you? So we have the actual building in discussion right in the center. It's up there, right?
Yes.
And as a planning commission, you understood that's what you were talking about. I mean, you're talking about the whole zone and things, but
correct.
Did the planning commission like that style right in the middle of a residential area? And
well, once again, I'm not going to guess what was going on in everybody else's heads, but at least to me, it was very clear that all of those, and we also asked the same question of Rob about the Sundwall building that has a little bit of a slope. It goes from 27, I think, up to 32. It's got a bit of a pitch on the roof. So at least to me, it was clear that it was a 2-story structure. But I can't see any harm in just having the Planning Commission revisited, if that's the wishes of the council. But I'll leave that up to you.
I would like to have a chance to hear the Planning Commission conversation. I listened to the meeting, but by the time I listened to it, to understand that the audio was not understandable, I didn't have time to contact everybody.
I think we just
I
have
would
to
like
be
to
very
understand.
concise what we want, because they've already given a motion what they wanted, but be very concise what we're asking for clarification on that. So, but thank you, Chris.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And congratulations, Chris, and thank you for being willing to take on the extra work of being the chair.
And please let the commission know I agree with Ron that like what you guys talk about and decide is important to us.
Well, since we let Chris come up, Wes, did you participate in the meeting?
He was
okay. I just want to make sure. He's an alternate, but I wasn't sure. A lot of times he does. Okay, so council, what would you like to do here? Are you guys wanting to hear from the applicant before we do anything?
I know what I want to do, but I'm not sure how many.
I mean, would that help you to get, is there anything you need from the applicant to help you move forward with any?
No.
Okay.
I don't think I need to hear from them.
Do we have
I
any?
move that we continue it and receive some input between now and March 18th meeting and bring this back in March 18th.
Well, they don't have a planning commission plan tomorrow.
till the end of the month. Let's
you're
move
right.
it to the first part of April.
April, whatever.
I think it was the 8th.
8th.
April 15th.
Yeah.
8th.
It'd be what?
15th.
15th? Oh, that's.
I'll
Right.
second that.
We don't
Spring
have
break.
meeting.
I have a
first.
motion by Ron to move this. Now, do we want to be more specific what we're asking the planning commission to give?
Yes.
So we have a second by Kim. So what's the?
Basically, the main question for me is, did they understand are they in agreement of going to the 2 stories, removing the 1-story requirement? That's the main issue. The rest of it, I'm not concerned about.
And I do have it. Kim, are you still a second on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So can I just add something before we vote? I'm supportive of that motion, but you know, they're talking about 1 and 2 stories, 35 height and different things. But I think there's a big difference between a flat roof 2-story, 35-foot building and one that has gables. So I would like that a little more discussion on, you know, because I think we're trying to make it compatible with the neighborhood and the residential.
Well, we have the chairman of the planning
Yeah.
commission here. We would like to address that.
Oh, we'll give it back to them and
Right.
Yeah, but that's part of what we're asking them to do, right? Okay.
Anything else council would like to have the planning commissioner address that you were not clear for?
There isn't anything else that I have on my list. To me, while I very much value the planning commission and their thinking and their decision making on things, with regard to the 1-story, 2-story, it isn't going to matter to me.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any? And it's really we want to hear about the height from the planning commission. You want clarification on the height if they want to keep it there. If it was 1-story, the building to stay 1-story or 2. We wanted to have a clarification.
Actually, one other item it just occurred to me: the issue of how we measure grade, how we measure height from grade, would be another thing that I would ask them to weigh in on.
Is that an amendment then?
Or do you want to make it part of your motion?
I'll make it part of my motion.
Okay. And you're still a second with
Second
that?
it.
Okay. Is there any further discussion before we go?
Can we have Stephanie read back the motion?
Yes,
we can. So we understand what.
You put me on the spot when you do this, you know that.
I know. I'm sorry.
That's no problem. So I have that we move to continue this item to get further input on April 15th meeting. We're going to clarify the Planning Commission's recommendation for either the 1-story or 2-story requirement, and we're also going to determine how the height is measured. Did I miss anything on that? Okay.
Okay. Do we have electronic voting? Is it, I mean, are we?
We may, but I don't know if I do now.
If not, if it's not up, we'll just do voice both.
Oh, here it is.
Okay, it is up. This continues.
I'm going to have to vote
Why don't we wait for
verbally.
everyone to get their
yeah,
vote in?
because mine
Hey,
isn't working.
Scott, what would be your vote on this?
Yes, for continuing.
It is 5-0 to continue the side and have it go back to Planning Commission. Okay, thank you for all those who attended tonight. Okay, we'll now move on to item number 2B, which is the ordinance of the Fling Committee structure and amendment. This is going to be Rob Patterson. A question I'd have on this item number 2B is Rob, maybe kind of address, do we want to have the Fling as a committee, or would we like to have it be a volunteer? And so, Rob, maybe you can kind of help give us some guidance.
Mayor, one really quick question. Would you mind if we jump to 3A first and allow our auditor to do that?
That would be, council, would you mind if we go to 3A so we get that order?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we're now going to table not table, but we will move from 2B over to 3A, which is our 2023-24 audit presentation by Steve Rowley. No one wants to stay for our audit presentation? Okay, Wes, you are someone. And Liz, you are someone. Oh, Liz walked out.
She's coming back.
You're fine.
I always feel like the most popular person when I come to stand up and everybody leaves the room. But honestly, I sit through a lot of council meetings and go through a lot of these, and it's always interesting, the discussions, and I am glad I'm just the auditor and not in your shoes or dealing with any of these types of situations.
And I feel the same way in reverse, so thank you.
You'd rather be the auditor?
I'd much prefer to be here than be doing auditing.
I totally understand that viewpoint. It takes all sorts to make the world go round, right? Okay, but all joking aside, my name is Steve Rowley, and I'm the engagement partner over the city's financial statement audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024. We're going to kind of just go through this as quickly as possible. I know you probably have more on your agenda tonight as well, and I don't want to take up a lot of your time. So on page 1 is our independent auditor's opinion. And in our opinion, the financial statements included are in all material respects the respective financial position of the city as of June 30th, 2024, and the respective changes in financial position and cash flows thereof for the year then ended. So that's what we call an unmodified opinion. That is a clean opinion that meets all the requirements of the state, as well as any bond rating agencies or bonding requirements, any of that. So that's great. That's our opinion. How do we come to those conclusions? And that's what is summarized in the rest of the next couple pages. Specifically, the basis for opinions. We base our opinions on the test work that we perform. And that test work is performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards, where we are required to look at confirmations, external sources. We look for corroborating information. We can't just take things at face value. We have to have what's called professional skepticism, or in my vocabulary, a little paranoia about what we're being told, that we need to verify what's happening. Those are our responsibilities. Management also has responsibilities to maintain internal controls and to operate the city under the supervision of ultimately the city council, who is governance. Your responsibility is to oversee things generally and to have input and to make improvements where necessary. So undergoing an audit does not relieve anybody of those responsibilities.
I'm going to jump ahead a little bit with my question, but I'm not suggesting it's wrong. I just don't understand, and hoping you can explain to me how the financial statements present fairly in all material respects, and yet we found a material weakness. Those two seem at odds to me. Obviously, they're not, but they seem that way to me.
Certainly, yeah. Excellent question. So what we're looking at with the material weakness finding that you're referring to is there's a weakness in the internal control structure. So what we identified as we went through and performed the audit procedures, there were several areas, and specifically the finding I think is going to be on page like 51 or 2 or...
Just had it. It is 58. 58.
Yeah, I'm not sure what PDF
sorry,
page.
that's the city responses on 58.
But I think it's page 57 specifically. So if you look at the bottom number, so it's probably going to be more like page 61 on the PDF. Perfect, right there. Okay, so as we went through and performed our procedures and auditing the financial statements, we look at the internal controls of the city to determine, is there processes, procedures, or guardrails that would prevent potential errors from happening. And in some cases, the guardrails weren't quite stiff enough to ensure that everything was correct when it was received by us. And so as we went through the audit, we identified several material adjustments that had to be made in order to bring the financials into compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. And so what we're saying with this aspect is it's those guardrails or processes or procedures that had a weakness in it that prevented the information from being materially correct when we first got it. Through those adjustments and through working with David and the rest of the finance, we got those numbers where it needed to be, and we're all in agreement that that's where it is. So I see where the confusion is. The numbers are currently correct and materially correct. There was still the weakness there that is they're making efforts to improve on that.
That makes perfect sense, and thank you very much for the clarification.
Definitely. And I do, since we're on this page already, I do want to point out the bulleted items there are the areas that had the material adjustments. Last year there was a similar finding, and I think there was at least 9 or 10 areas. So this is, in my personal opinion, significant improvement towards doing that. And there's certainly a lot of things that impacted some of that. Certainly David's basically had not even a full year by the end of the fiscal year. So there's still some learning curve on that side. So we've definitely seen improvement even from last year to this year. And I suspect that there will be even more improvement if not this finding completely go away by next year. So I do want to give credit for that. Even though there's a finding, there was significant improvement and things are on the upward trend there. see if there's any, oh yeah, and so certainly the city is looking at ways to improve that. And if there's any questions or concerns about those, you can feel free to reach out to me as well related to that. I've been talking with David quite a bit over the last while, looking at ways, how do we improve that? What are things to do? And so I certainly feel like that is completely within his wheelhouse to handle and fix for the upcoming fiscal year. Okay, so basically going back to the opinion, which is going to be like PDF page 3 or so, it goes through a couple other things. So it talks about what our responsibilities are, and there's some indented items that are, so the next page. So at the bottom of this page, it has some indented areas. Those are some of the key things that the audit standards and the accountancy standards require that we point out and say, these are specifically the auditor responsibilities. That first one, as I alluded to, exercise professional judgment and professional skepticism. A lot of our testing is based on a risk assessment. We look at the city, we look at the internal controls, we look at the processes and what types of transactions we're entering into, and we determine where there's risk, where could something go wrong, and where could it go really wrong. And then we build our procedures around that to make sure that if there's a weakness in one area, we have additional testing and auditing that's done for that. So that's what some of these bullet points talk about, is that risk assessment. Now, as we go through, and the rest of the part of this report talks about required supplementary information, so that includes the management's discussion and analysis, which immediately follows the opinion. And what that is in narrative format, kind of a trend analysis from what happened in fiscal 24, compares it to fiscal 23, and says in brief, 10,000 foot level, why that happened, what changed, what was the impact. So that's very helpful to look at for those who aren't really numbers nerds, for lack of a better term, right? So that's very helpful. But basically what we're saying here is that information reconciles directly to what was audited, which is the financial statements themselves. So in our opinion, as a whole, those are materially correct, but we don't go through and give an opinion specifically on like the management's discussion and analysis. The second part talks about supplementary information, and those are schedules that aren't required by government accounting standards, but are included for other reasons. In this case, the supplementary information is the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which basically is a mini financial statement of what federal monies were spent by the city during the fiscal year, and summarizes that so you can see in total what was spent there. So we'll look at that momentarily. The last paragraph of this talks about government auditing standards. What government auditing standards requires is specifically that we look at and evaluate the internal controls, which is those processes, procedures, those guardrails, right, to help protect what's happening, to evaluate those internal controls, and to, if there's any weaknesses, communicate those to the council. Additionally, we do look at instances or items related to compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. And if there was any weaknesses or issues of non-compliance, those would be reported as well. So let's jump back to that report, which is going to be on page 59, which is probably more like page 64 on the PDF. I think down one more, I believe.
Did you say it's page 60?
It's page 59 on the bottom, but probably on the PDF, it's going to look about page 64. Yep, okay, so this is the Government Auditing Standards Report. Now, the next three reports we're going to look at, this is going to sound a lot like a broken record, so we're just going to like breeze through the last two because they're very similar. In all of these next reports, we're looking at internal controls related to, so it's page 59, sorry, I didn't give you time to get there. It's basically like third or fourth page from the back.
It's in supplemental reports. Okay.
Correct.
There we go.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, so what this report looks at is we're looking at the internal controls related to financial reporting, which we already talked about, the weakness that was identified related to the financial close, and that was the finding. That was the only weakness in the internal controls that we identified. We do believe the city does have strong controls in all the other areas to ensure that the financial information is materially correct. The second half of this talks about compliance. And if there was any instances of non-compliance, we would report those to you here as well. And if it was certainly severe enough, you would have already heard about it. But there is no instances of non-compliance to report on this report. Let's skip back a couple pages.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, certainly.
So, and I appreciate this, and I'm going to study this more in different things, but you're saying, and we've corrected some of these problems, but can you give me an example of one of the problems? I mean, we have bullet points in that, but can you tell me exactly what was one of the specific problems with the controls? I mean, is there an example of one of the 5? And
Certainly.
Okay.
So, and this is actually a fairly common error that we find as auditors it's related to the accounts payable. So this is going back to the accrual accounting concept, where if the work was performed during the fiscal year and we didn't receive the invoice until, say, July, September, even October or November,
Okay.
if that was for work that we had performed, say, road work, they refinished a parking lot or something like that, and they just delayed giving you an invoice. There wasn't a process to have evaluated or to have identified that expense should have been pulled back into the fiscal year that was being audited. And
so the statement for the work done year before came in the next fiscal year, but it wasn't attributed back to the previous one when the work was done. That's what you're saying?
Correct. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
I understand that.
Yeah, and so interestingly enough, that type of an error also impacted the capital asset side because that happened to have been a capital expenditure. And this is actually very common with contractors. We see this a lot. Sometimes they delay sending invoices for 2 or 3 months. I'm not sure who can float that kind of money for 2 or 3 months, but it happens all the time. And so that's a very common error that we see is missing some of those. Certainly there could be smaller things that are missed, but in this case, there was a couple of significant items.
So basically, we just got to make sure it's whatever happens in the right fiscal year.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And so because this is very common, it's just a matter of keeping everybody on their toes, especially right after year end, to specifically consider, should this have been pulled back into the prior year? In terms of...
We've talked about internal controls a little bit.
Yeah.
Am I correct in understanding that, at least broadly speaking, you are not providing an opinion about our internal controls? However, when you find an error or a problem with the numbers, then that perhaps implicates some of the internal controls, and you can highlight that.
Yep.
Did I?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So our report on the internal controls basically says we look at the internal controls to determine how much testing, basically to identify where are the weaknesses, where do we need to add more audit procedures, but not to give an opinion on those. But if we do find something, yes, we bring those up and say, ideally, this control would work like this, or it was designed properly, it just, somebody wasn't following the playbook type of thing. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so back up a couple pages. This is page 52, which is probably going to be about 56 on the PDF, but 52 on the bottom, still in the supplementary information section. This is the Uniform Guidance Report. So I think 2 more pages. Okay, perfect, right there. So the Uniform Guidance, this is another term for a single audit. If you've been around the accounting and auditing world for long enough, you've probably heard the term single audit. They've changed that to Uniform Guidance because why not? But basically what that means is they've now made a unified approach to auditing these federal awards, and so that's why it's the Uniform Guidance. Our opinion, so during the fiscal year, the city had expended a significant amount of federal funds, and because of that, it triggers additional testing and compliance. In essence, the federal government wants us to look at the strings that are attached to that federal money and see whether the city followed all of those rules and spent it appropriately. Otherwise, you risk sending it back or getting fined or penalized, all those things. So during the year, there were 2 grants that were significantly received, and that's summarized on that schedule of expenditures, which is 2 pages down. But basically, we had a total of $3,136,000 of federal funds that were spent during fiscal 24. And the major program that was tested as part of this was the ARPA funds.
Did you guys do a single audit also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what this is. This Uniform Guidance is the testing of the single audit. And so, yeah, that schedule of expenditure federal awards lists out all of those federal awards. And the major program required to be tested was that ARPA money.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so in our opinion, the city complied in all material respects with the types of compliance requirements referred to above that could have a direct and material effect on each of its major federal programs for the year then ended. So in that's an unmodified opinion. We did not find any instances of non-compliance in what was spent for those federal funds. In relation to this as well, we do look at the internal controls related to those federal compliance requirements, and we did not have any weaknesses related to those internal controls either. So that's
this is federal. Do you look at state? If we get state grants, do you look at that at all?
The state grants just fall under normal auditing requirements. Certainly we consider that, and that's kind of part of the government auditing standards when we look at compliance. So we consider the grants that the city receives, because that is something that if you didn't comply with those requirements, you might have to send those back or be penalized or whatever. So we do consider those under just the government auditing standards. The federal, they actually specify with like a 600-page book what you have to do for each of these federal awards. So it is very in-depth, and there's a lot of things that have to be tested with that. It's called the compliance supplement. Yeah.
So you felt like we met all the requirements here?
Yes.
I mean, with all the stuff going on in Washington right now about fraud, waste, and different things, you think we're okay? They won't come back and say, hey, you need to give us $1 million back? Or
yeah, from
Probably
our
not.
sample, and we actually tested, I don't remember the exact percentage of it, but we followed all the requirements. We had to pick a sample of at least 40 items. And among those 40 items, I think we probably tested about 90% of the total federal awards that were spent. Okay. And then we still look over the rest to just see, does this all look like it's reasonable and appropriate?
And we did it right. Okay.
Yeah. So we did not identify anything like what they're finding in the
Some
federal
places.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the federal. We've already done the government auditing standards, so we're going to skip now to page 61, and this is going to be the state compliance guide report. So this will be the last report, so I think it's the last 3 pages, basically. Keep going. So it'll be the next page after this. Okay, so this is the state compliance guide. So if there was a specific grant that the state wanted us to test, they would include it here in this section. But what was required to be tested this year are those items in that indented bullet point list. So in each of those areas, we're required to look at the controls that the city has to ensure those are being followed. And then we also have sample-based testing of those instances to see if there was any non-compliance related to that. And in our opinion, through our testing, the city complied in all material respects with the state compliance requirements referred to above. And additionally, with the internal controls related to that as well, we did not identify any weaknesses or deficiencies in the internal controls related to state compliance, which is a lot, and most of it has nothing to do with the accounting department. So that really does mean there's a team effort through all the different departments and levels of the city to ensure that those are being met. So that's very well done. We do like to see that as auditors, and I know the state auditor's office likes to see that as well. So a couple other things that we just have to go on. We did not have any difficulties in working with management. They were great to work with. They provided things timely. We're very open to any questions we ask them. Sometimes it gets really bothersome, probably having an auditor there, but they're great to work with. We always appreciate the hospitality of the city staff and allowing us to do our job so that we can report back to you how this went. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this point.
Okay, I have a question on page number 3, and I noticed throughout the thing, you have underneath financial highlights that you showed that our fund balance, our general fund, was at 41.7%, but by state standards, we're supposed to be at 35%. Did we, David, or with you, now that we know that, does that mean we have extra funds that need to be transferred out, or did we already do that as part of, we recognize that was coming?
So the 41.7% number that you're looking at is the percentage of expenditures. But if you read a little bit further, it talks about the percentage of fund balance to revenues did come out at 35%, okay, which is what we're required to be at. So we took care of those transfers before the audit started. And and it was sufficient.
Yeah, good question.
Just to highlight, what was our cash balance with actual cash in unrestricted funds? Is it that the net position? I know the net position increased, but what was our actual cash that we have, current assets? That's your assets.
So if you go to page 12, that's going to be the statement of net position, and that's basically citywide what your cash balances are. And it splits it between your governmental activities. Just a couple more pages. Yep, right there. So at the top there is your unrestricted cash. So within the governmental activities, 16.6 million. Through the business type activities, 13 million, for a total of approximately 29.7.
Okay, does that mean the bond or the grants we got from the federal government? I mean, tell me what you say governmental versus business. Tell me.
Oh, so at the very top of the page, there's the governmental activities. So
Correct.
that basically splits. There's the governmental funds and then the business type funds. So that's going to be your sewer, water, PI funds. And so that's summarized within all of the funds of the city, that total of 29 million. The restricted cash.
So we have $29 million sitting in different accounts? Getting
Yes.
5%, 7%.
Yeah, which adds up to be quite a bit when you've got a little over 5% or around 5% in the PTIF. So, the interest income earned actually was pretty significant. So on the next page, actually, you can see that towards the bottom of that weird-looking schedule is the unrestricted investment earnings.
Mm-hmm.
So that totaled approximately 1.5 million of interest earned during fiscal 24. That's a lot.
So here we make 1.5 million. It has to stay in the different things. Does it just also, I understand when we have our things, we see the interest income, but in these sewer funds or the water funds, it's just they've generated inside their fund, correct?
Yeah, so that interest earned number of 1.5 million is spread among the entire city. So each individual fund would have its own interest earned percentage of that. Yep.
And did I correctly understand in email earlier, David, that it isn't necessarily based exactly on the amount in each fund, that we determine an allocation across the funds and that's how the interest is allocated out?
Yeah, years ago, there was an allocation percentage calculated. And that's when we received, because our PTIF, our Public Treasurer's Investment Fund, we have one account that is shared between multiple funds. And so we have to have an estimated way of splitting out that interest. It's something that is on my project list to look into and to reevaluate, because it has been some time since we came up with those allocations and some of those balances has shifted. But you're correct that we allocate based on a percentage calculation.
Okay. So it's in the ballpark, but if we've got $1 million sitting in our sewer fund and we're making 5% across, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're allocating $50,000.
Right.
Okay.
So I have a question kind of for both of you, David, and things. On page 10 in the book, where we're talking about the Highland City's outstanding debt. So I'm always kind of interested in this. At the end of fiscal year 2024, which is be June 30th, right? 2024?
Correct.
It said that we owed $3,695,000 in revenue bonds. And of course, you've made payments in September of this last year, so that afterwards. So I know I ask this every year, but I'm never quite sure what this means. What are the notes payable, which is 1.2 million?
Yeah. So that's made up of two different notes. There's one note to the Highland Conservation District for the
okay, that we've talked about before, which is 94,000. Okay.
Yep. And then the other part is the Provo River water users,
where we bought the extra water shares in there.
I believe that's the
case. When they did pipe the Murdoch Canal, there's certain things we have the responsibility on.
Well, we got some extra shares that we paid for, saved water shares, they called them. Okay, so those are conservation water things that we pay and that we've talked about in the council. Okay, explain the compensated absences of 400,000. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, so what that includes is what are the benefits, the accrued vacation or accrued sick leave that the employees accrue from year to year. what is that balance as of June 30th? So that's the amount that throughout all the employees of the city that were employed as of June 30th, that's the dollar amount of the benefit that they would be essentially entitled to if they were to leave the city.
Steve, question on that, because just out of curiosity, I don't know this. So we don't pay out sick leave if somebody leaves. We only pay out vacation. Do you take that into account? Our personnel regs? Okay.
Yeah. Now that will change this next year with the GASB 101 compensated absences standard. What the standard was at the time was, what are you required to pay out upon termination regardless of how they left? And so the sick maybe was only included if there was somebody that we were currently paying out, but I don't believe it was included. But going forward, they're looking at it more from the FASB or the commercial accounting standards, where they're now going to say, they've accumulated this leave, it earns from year to year. How much of that do you anticipate paying out? So if an employee has 100 hours of sick leave as of June 30th, if you anticipate or estimate that employee would take maybe 20 hours of sick leave of that 100 hours, then that would also need to be accrued. So we'll probably see a little bump up to account for that additional amount.
I'm having a hard time understanding why that has to be tracked. What value is there in that number that is part of their salary, and they're going to take vacation and still get the exact same salary every single month or 2 weeks, whatever it is? I'm sorry, but it just doesn't make sense to me.
The vacation under the current policy does kind of make sense because they've accumulated these hours, and if they were to split ties with the city, that would be
but the
a
percentage
check
that
paid
would
to
do
them.
that is not. This is a big number, and you go, where does it go? It doesn't go anywhere unless somebody quits, and then you
Right.
pay it out.
Right.
So otherwise, it's just part of the salary, part of the whole
Sure.
salary. Anyway.
Yeah. We can have a lot of philosophical discussions about that. I think we're on the same page there. But the standards are what they are, and so that's what that represents. Excellent questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll do. Okay, we appreciate it. Okay, we'll now move on to our next item, which is now we're going to go back to item number 2B, which we talked about is the Fling Committee structure and amendment. With Rob, we talked about.
Can we have a 5-minute break? Would it be okay?
Council, you're okay with 5 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, I
let's
just
take-
like to go to the restaurant. We've been here for 3 hours.
I know. Let's do that. There's Brett over here. Finally. We're now back. We're now going to talk about number 2B, the Fling Committee structure and amendment. Now, this could be something we can just discuss a little bit about, continue whatever he wants. What do you have here, Rob?
Just quick background. We discussed a little last time about the need to update our committee. So in the packet, there was a proposed ordinance setting up a board. But before even getting to that, we wanted to raise the question of, do we need a committee to begin with? It's been treated like a formal committee under our code because we've had a committee since like the 80s. Committees under our code are very formal. They're quasi-public bodies that need to kind of go through those more public meeting type things. They're not necessary to make decisions. Formal committees are slower to react. So if you have something that needs a lot of quick decisions, it's like trying to call a council meeting every time you need to make a decision about something really administrative. It's slow to respond. So we thought we have the option of just disbanding kind of the quasi-existing, quasi-not-existing committee, and just like we do with many other city events, just tell staff, go and do it, and staff will work with volunteers and gather people, and we'll just make decisions as per normal processing, our policies and all of that. Like with our egg hunt and trick or treat street, that's just put on by staff, but we do get other people involved in it. We could do that with Fling. We just won't have a formal committee, but our events coordinator, assistant administrator, whoever's involved from the staff level, just direct it and work with the community to get it done. Or we could still go with the formal Fling committee where we'll have a board and hold meetings and do that. So when we were talking about this earlier, we thought if you'd like to just have it be kind of informal and let staff just run it, and have a council member liaison that gets appointed to help, and not a board. Staff would support that. If you do want to go the more formal route, well, we proposed an ordinance. We maybe want to take some more tweaks and look it over again before having the council approve it. So our recommendation is either disband it or give us another meeting to get it a little bit more right.
I have some thoughts on this that I like the idea of disbanding it. And the reason that I like it is that you have, and giving the staff the ability to pull together of whatever team they want and call it whatever you want to support what you need to have done. The real advantage of this is where the responsibility is. If you have a formal committee and they vote, and you've got a staff member who's in that committee but maybe isn't a voting member, or even if they are, they get outvoted at the end of the fling and it went horrible, who do you fire? It's like,
who do you praise?
Yeah, it holds our events coordinator accountable for the outcome, and they can bring in the volunteers. They can decide whether the volunteers' recommendations are the right recommendations, et cetera, et cetera. And I really like the idea of disbanding it and giving the autonomy and the authority and the control of everything to the staff.
Agree.
I agree.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
I think this is basically an argument in favor of the status quo, because that's how we've been running.
Just remove,
and I'm perfectly good with that.
We'll remove the trappings of formality from it and just let it keep running as it has been, essentially.
Okay, do you have a motion?
Wait just a second. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So Aaron, as the city administrator, does that put an undue burden on the staff, or really doesn't change anything?
No, I think it doesn't. It doesn't change a lot of how we've been operating, except now we are going to be compliant with OPMA, because it doesn't. It's no the group who will help us with Fling, because it cannot be done by one person, will now no longer need to follow open meetings laws, which we weren't really.
So do you have trouble getting volunteers for the different functions?
I would say we are a lot better here than I have seen in other cities. We have a lot of passionate people who have stuck with their, they like the parade, the baby contest, whatever it is that they've done, they like that and they stick with it. And it's wonderful, honestly.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure you had enough volunteers. And things.
Thank you.
I move that the city council dissolve the formal Fling committee and instruct staff to directly oversee and operate the Fling with the assistance of volunteers.
I'll second.
I have a little bit of grief with this motion because I don't believe we have a formal Fling committee, and therefore I don't believe it is possible to dissolve it. I don't believe that we do on paper.
There's this. Doug makes a very good point of, we had an ordinance that kind of created it. It's kind of been operating from working with the volunteers, telling them there is no committee. There is our events coordinator, and the council's told us there's no committee, but you're all welcome to help us. Let's figure this out. I think it might just be helpful so we can say the council doesn't want a formal structure, as we've maybe been talking about. We're not going to hold meetings. We're not going to vote on things. We're just going to work with staff. I think it'd be helpful just to have that direction from the council. Maybe this isn't the right language to get there, but that's why I've kind of presented it that way.
If I'm good with add the term, I move that city council operationally dissolve the formal Fling the way it's been operating. Would that help?
No, because it's been operating as it's not a formal.
It's not a formal.
Given Rob's description, I'm okay with the language.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any further clarification before we go to vote? Okay, then we will go to vote on that. That passes 5-0. Okay, we'll now move on to our next item, which is a resolution for ending of time. And I believe, Doug, you'd kind of passed out notes on that.
Yeah, everybody, I passed out a substitute resolution, basically. But Rob, if you want to hit it is just removing the 2/3 requirement. So
You changed the meeting start time from 7 to 6 beginning in May. Staff was excited to maybe move the meeting end time from 10 o'clock to 9 o'clock as well. So you have the previous resolution that said you'd end the meetings at 10 unless you extended it. The one kind of wrinkle, which is what Doug has been talking about, is in that resolution, and I carried it forward into this one, is that it required a supermajority to extend. So 2/3, which is 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5. The question is, if you want to adjust your meeting end time to 9 o'clock, with the exception of work sessions or emergency meetings that are scheduled kind of to go past, and do you still want that supermajority requirement?
And as a practical matter, we haven't had that supermajority requirement.
Correct.
Because we have been continuing meetings on a vote of 3-2 routinely. It has been it was in the resolution, but that is not how we have been operating. And incidentally, just a quick aside, Rob, section 2 that you added in, that was a really nice addition. That is new since the last resolution.
So let me ask a question, because I thought about this, because I didn't know how you got 2/3 of 5 people. But why wouldn't it just be a majority, like 3 out of 5 or something?
There's certain things that, for example, there's very certain votes in state law that are required to be supermajority, and the council could impose on any vote a supermajority requirement in your procedures. You typically don't, because it just creates more a headache to keep track of when you need that supermajority or not. So keeping it with a simple majority is standard. The only reason I propose
3 out of 5 would be okay.
Yeah, 3 out of 5 would be just fine. Okay.
And that's why I'd have it, because it's hard to do 2/3 of 5.
Agreed.
Means really 4.
Although I'm getting shorter all the time, so maybe that. Right.
So is there further discussion we need or a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move that City Council adopt the proposed resolution setting a meeting end time of 9. Do you want me to?
You want to talk about if it's just a 3 out of 5?
Yeah. Do you guys want 3 out of 5?
Yeah, 3 out of 5 is what I was.
3 out of 5.
And
But we say a majority
rather than 3 out of 5.
And this is effective May 1st, which is the other. So we probably should add that.
Yes.
Effective May 1st.
Second.
No, Brittany brought up an interesting thing. So if we only have 4 council people, how do you figure the majority?
Okay.
The mayor?
The mayor, because
Yeah.
the mayor
Okay.
then jump in.
Did I miss
So
that?
we have a motion by Kim, second by Doug.
So do we need to put the exceptions in it? So the exceptions to 9 p.m. end time for emergency meetings and meetings that are specifically scheduled to
That's
begin
already
or continue.
That's already in the resolution.
Yeah, it's in the resolution, proposed
Okay.
resolution.
Are we clear on what the motion is, Stephanie? Okay, do we have a Slido or slide? Yeah. Yeah.
So it is 3 out of 5. Okay.
It's a majority.
That passes 5-0. We'll now move on to item number 4. These are consent items. We have consent item number 4A, approval of the meeting minutes from February 4, 2025, and ratification or approval of large purchases. These are consent. Would anyone like to pull the consent items?
I would like to pull item 4A from consent.
Okay, if not, we'll make a motion then on 4B and then come back to 4A.
I move to adopt the consent agenda.
4B.
I'll second
the
it.
other 4A isn't on the consent agenda anymore.
And I have, so motion by Doug, second by Scott. We'll go ahead and go to vote on that. That passes 5-0, and Doug, you pulled number 4B.
Yeah, I have 3 changes. I emailed them out, so you may have seen them already. Stephanie has reviewed and confirmed that she is okay with them. On page 3 of the draft minutes, it states that Councilmember Doug Courtney moved that the City Council approve consent item 2A, etc. But according to the video, I did not refer to it as a consent item since it had been pulled from consent. I propose striking the word consent from this sentence. It seems like a trivial thing, but I don't want to give the impression that once something has been pulled, it remains on the consent agenda. Second, on page 4 of the draft minutes, I'm quoted as ending my sentence with, my statement with, in the meantime, I found Councilmember Bills to be a person of strong integrity who has performed well in this position. I will happily support re-electing her as our mayor pro tempore. While I do find Councilmember Bills to be a person of strong integrity who performed well as our mayor pro tempore, and while these sentences were in the printed copy I distributed to council and staff, when I made my statement, I omitted these sentences because it had been clear that Councilmember Rodella, whom I also find to be a person of strong integrity and who I expect will perform well as our mayor pro tempore, was interested in the position and that he would be voting for her since she had not yet had an opportunity to serve. I therefore propose to strike the last 2 sentences from my statement. Finally, on page 13 of the draft minutes, Councilmember Rodella, according to the video, clarified that the temporary speed bumps, they cost $35,000, not $100,000. Because this was in direct response to an earlier resident observation that they cost $100,000, which is included in the draft minutes. I think Councilmember Rodella's comment should also be included. I therefore propose to amend the draft minutes to insert the text. Councilmember Rodella stated the cost of the temporary speed bumps was $35,000, not $100,000. Immediately after the text, provide some solutions to the problems that exist in the middle of the penultimate paragraph of the draft minutes related to this item.
Any questions on that?
I'll make a proposal or move. I move that the Highland City Council approve consent item 4A with the revisions that Councilman Courtney has suggested.
I'll second.
Motion by Scott, second by Kim. Do we need another vote on this or voice? Okay, we'll start down here with you, Ron.
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Brittany?
Yes.
Okay, consent passes. Okay, we'll now move on to the expedited item, which is number 5B, which is an action of the sewer slip lining project bid award. Chris Trusty.
Thanks, Mayor, City Council. No? Okay. So we did this bid a little bit differently than some of the other bids that we've done before. We have been doing a slip lining project for the last few years. We wanted to take a bigger global look of where we need to go to continue this program over the next 4 years. These are projects that we've kind of identified when we did our sewer rate analysis last fall, and we've included the costs for those. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to completely continue that out. So we wanted to get a look at that, but we also wanted to put this out there because we had some discussions with some of the vendors that provide this product about having a little bit more workability to coordinate with other projects that they have in the Utah County area. So we put together a package, phased the remaining sewer lines into 4 groups that would get us about the price range that we have just annually budgeted for this project. And that kind of shows the 4 different zones that we have now. If you could advance it. This is phase 1. So this is the bid that we are asking to be awarded tonight. This is near the Clubhouse Drive area, and it's just the first phase. And so if you can advance that again, I'd like to suggest that we approve this a bid award to in situ form for a total amount of $249,850, which includes a 10% contingency.
Hey, can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
So, comment, my neighborhoods, one of the older neighborhoods you did this, are under Andy, and it went along very smoothly, and I support it. I thought we spent a lot of money replacing the sewer up in this area.
Yeah, I thought we'd already done some stuff in this subdivision.
Yeah, we did, because there was a lot of contention with cottages on the green and over the...
but maybe that was only the front half.
I thought we did the whole
I'm absolutely
back end.
sure that I have not done any other projects in this area.
Chris, can you go back
We
to
know
the
you
map?
haven't, but I thought we did a big project there because there was a lot
No,
of
they're
debate.
starting. If you look Country Club Drive, we did down Country Club Drive. It's now the subdivisions in the back. We did that Country Club Drive.
Yeah.
But we did more than lining the pipes there. We actually replaced a lot of them.
Yeah, because we had tree issues. We were concerned if we were going to lose trees.
Yeah.
I understand what Scott's saying. I believe they did come and this is what's called Cottages on the Green. I think they went all the way through Cottages on the Green and then stopped there because this is the older subdivisions back behind.
My recollection is it was to about Hampton Court there, is where we went to on that project. I think you're right, Mayor. It was just it was the front entryway.
Can you go to the previous slide to this to show the overall? The blue, what year is that going to be? That's phase 2?
That's phase 2. So that would be next year. And we've gotten bids for the next 4 years. So I think our goal would be to bring this forward once our FY26 budget has been adopted to have a bid award for that phase 2 probably in July.
I live in phase 2 and they just sealed those roads.
And this doesn't require any road work since it's all in.
Very good. Very good.
Absolutely. That's
because you know where I was headed with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Okay.
So I have, Chris, I've had 2 residents reach out on 6400 West. There's been marking on all the sewer manholes on that street. You know why?
We've been doing some analyses of some of the sewer lines. Just we had a flow meter installed and left it in there specifically through the sewer bowl to see how that might affect some of the flows.
You're testing my subdivision to see how much sewage comes out.
Just to evaluate the sewer, the capacity.
I did have a group, and I did tell them that it was time to go flush. So I said, let's test it. Okay. Any questions on this slip line? Okay. If not, we can have a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move that City Council approve a contract with in situ form, okay, and an amount up to $249,850 for the fiscal year 25 sewer lining project, and authorize the city administrator to sign the contract documents.
I'll second it.
I have a motion by Kim, second by Ron. No further discussion. We'll go vote.
Mayor, I have a comment about what we just did when we're finished here.
Scott, are you able to get logged in?
I've got it.
Okay. 5-0. Okay, Ron.
We have a budget. We have a list of projects that they're going to work on. They go out and get bids. They go through all this work. It comes back to us, and we have to approve it. Are we going to actually ever say no when they've done all that work? We've approved it in the budget. I don't understand why anything has to come back to us. It's in the budget. If it's in the budget and we've got all the capital laid out and we know the sewer line's going to go in, we know a contract's got to be signed, they get all the bids, they're doing all this work, and then we come back. It seems like such a ridiculous process, because are we ever going to say no after they've done all that?
There times instances, there's been times where staff has said, we're not going to accept the low bid because we've had this type of issue or that.
They can bring that to us. But bringing something to us that's just check mark, check mark, check mark, I just don't understand why we're spending time, our valuable time on the council, doing things that we're not going to ever do anything different than what we just did. I have a hard time with that.
To me, to Kurt's earlier point, I guess maybe the question is whether we want staff or council deciding that we're not going to do anything about it. In the case where staff decides not to accept the low bid and to take a higher one, where we might.
And they bring that to us.
Well, but now you're saying that staff is deciding whether or not we're going to decide whether or not we're going to go along with them. And
No,
they're
I
only
think
going to
if they
bring
have
something to us.
If it's within budget, I don't know why they wouldn't accept the low bid. I mean, we don't have any information here that tells us we shouldn't accept this bid. I didn't see any in any of this presentation today. So our only vote is yes. I don't know how we would ever vote no. So why are we voting on things that are within budget, that have already been approved, and and we understand exactly where the money's going, and all they're doing is spending it as they told us they would.
Scott has a
Yeah, I just had a comment. So I understand your argument, Ron, but I think it's called transparency for the public. So, yeah, we can pass that budget every year, but we pass it, but it's pretty detailed, and the public's not going to sit there and go through every line item, but we bring it in the council. We're going to probably accept the low bid. They do the work, we agree, but we bring it and we vote on it. So, that's why I think we have a council. I think it's public transparency.
how we're spending the.
Yeah, how we're spending the money. Because
I get that, but we have a budget
focus on
process
it.
that the residents can be a part of as well, and that's public.
I know, but some
All
of the
those
concerns,
meetings are public.
okay, let's assume we say we're doing sewer lining or we're doing sewer projects that's $2.5 million. I think what Scott's talking about, it then shows the transparency of this is who bid, and I think the public can see where all the bids are at. I think it gives that transparency of all the bids, so the public maybe feels comfortable on that we did accept the low bid.
And there are a number of, I have people come to me and say, we watched your council meeting, and I was shocked. But there are people that watch this, and I just think it adds transparency. Yes, it puts more time on us, but,
If you remember, Mayor and Council, we had a discussion item about this maybe last meeting.
We did about what was it agreeable to put on and not.
Yes, and so staff intends to bring some information back to you after we research a little bit about what other cities do, because right now our limit is 25,000. Maybe it's time to increase that because it's probably been 20 years. Maybe it goes up to 50,000, or maybe we just do public works projects, or maybe you want to keep it the same, so out of an abundance of transparency. But we'll bring that information back to you to see if maybe there's a middle ground between what I'm hearing on.
well, I'm sure there's middle ground, but I still think, $250,000 expense, we probably should at least have a vote on it.
We will have a further discussion on this.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll now move on to our communication items. We have number 6A, which is the East-West Collector Road data follow-up. Chris.
Okay, this is just our collector road speed limit signs that I've shown the council at the last couple of presentations, but I thought it was a good base to start and to give some information of what we've done since our last meeting. So if you want to forward it. Speed data is currently being collected on that east section of Canal Boulevard between the Alpine Highway and the North County Boulevard. The plan is to, once we complete that study for at least a week, those were only placed out yesterday because of some staffing issues that we had, so we didn't get them out quite as quickly as we would have liked after the last city council meeting, but they'll be put out for at least a week, and then we'll move those up to 11,800 and then over to 11,200 north, so we can collect data on those streets as well. The goal is to have all of the speed data on those east-west roads completed by the end of this month. We also have moved the temporary driver feedback sign from westbound Canal Boulevard to eastbound Canal Boulevard. So if you want to forward that again.
One question about that speed collection. That's 3 roads that we're talking about by the end of March, and I thought we wanted to keep them out for 2 weeks apiece.
Since the last one that we did on the west end of Canal Boulevard, we just put out for 1 week, and so I kind of thought maybe we would just go to 1 week in each location.
I'm good with that. I thought you had wanted to.
I'd love 2 weeks. I don't know how different the data is going to be. I think it's probably a week is sufficient.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
The thought was we'll leave the temporary driver feedback sign there on Canal Boulevard for a while, but I frankly think that we've underused that, and I think once we're done there, we'll probably move it over to 9600 North would be my recommendation. With some of the speeds that we saw in the presentation that we made last week, I think that's probably a good place to put it next. And but we'll probably rotate it around. I think these signs become especially more effective when people aren't ready for them to be there or expecting them, and maybe they actually don't realize just how fast they're going on these roads sometimes when they are so convenient to drive a little bit over the speed limit. We also will be adding some driver feedback signs to that east section of Canal Boulevard. It's the one section of the 3 that we have that we don't have the long-term driver feedback signs. We have ordered the cross traffic does not stop signs, the ones that will actually fit on the signpost. We expect to have those delivered to the city on Thursday, so hopefully we can get those put out by the end of the week. If not, it'll be early next week. And then once we have all that, staff will come back to City Council to present the options for the solutions that we have on those east to west collector roads. And I just threw in another sign in the presentation, a slide, not a sign, just to show where we've been at so far. So we've added 7 of the new driver feedback signs since we've implemented the traffic calming toolbox that we have with the city.
Is that second bullet point for me? For the older drivers?
No, it was not for you.
Oh, it's
I'm
actually
the
for
oldest
Ron.
one here. It's for me.
But this is good to see what we
Right.
we keep hearing residents, you're not doing anything. Going, well, hold on, let's start looking at what we have done. We put speed bumps on.
Right.
This is some other things here.
I'm not really sure what the difference is between the old signs and the new signs, but that was the information that I was given. We've got 5 new driver feedback signs that are on order that we hope to have in the next couple of weeks, and that includes the 2 that we'll put on the east end of Canal Boulevard. And we are, instead of just ordering these piecemeal, we're going to get a little bit more of a grouped order when we do that, because I don't see us not continuing to add additional signs throughout the city. We've also added 10 sets of the LED flashing stop signs, 5 sets of the rapid flashing beacon signs at the crossings, and we've got 2 additional sets of the rapid flashing beacon signs that are being designed as part of the Mitchell Hollow Trail.
Have you noticed by chance that Cedar Hills, it looks like they're taking out their speed tables?
Yeah.
Do you know, have you talked to them? Do you know why
I
they're
actually
doing that?
did talk to him, and he said that they are, as they're doing road projects, they are removing the ones that they have, not replacing them when
They're
they
not
do
replacing them.
when they do projects on those
Because that's
streets.
been, I've used them as the example of why we need to do more.
Well, then
I'm not
continue to
happy
use
with
that
all
as an
that.
example, and we'll get rid of any.
Well, and we're seeing from the legislators, I thought it was interesting that we saw from the legislators almost pass a bill against Salt Lake City to almost control their roads on what they're trying to do speed table wise. Some like, I think 1300 East, they put them in and the residents come unglued. On it. It's just, you got those who all want them in, and the second they get in, then the others come in and say no to get them out. I mean, we've seen that here. Get them on Canal, get them on. Second, on Canal, get them off. And you're going, who are you pleasing today? Okay, thank you for your feedback. Anything else?
One quick question, Chris, with regard to the driver feedback signs. It seems likely to me that at some point it becomes counterproductive to add more because people just start tuning them out.
I would
Have
agree.
we given any thought to where that point might be?
I think not specifically. That's one of the things that I hope to still continue to look at as we look at some of these other east-west roads. I don't know that they would be at all applicable to put on more of the local roads, the neighborhood residential roads. I think we're just looking at the collector roads and where we have some of the higher traffic counts and probably some of the higher speeds.
Okay.
Canal Boulevard seems, like a really good place to put those. I think 6,000 West, especially north of Timpanogos Highway, south of 11800 seems like a reasonable place to put those. I don't know that I feel like 9600 is necessarily, even though they do have really high speeds on that road. But probably something that we still have to kind of evaluate.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that the 18 that we're looking at here puts us to that point where it's counterproductive to add them in. I just wondered what you'd been thinking. Okay.
I think you're absolutely
Woohoo!
right.
Yeah, that's good.
You were just talking to Doug. We were watching the game.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I thought you were just really excited about my presentation.
I know. Sadly,
We
Chris,
were.
they weren't woo-hooing about either one of us.
Wow.
What were you saying? Yeah, good win. Good win. Sorry. Okay. Anything? Okay. Well, now we've on the Urban Deer program.
Urban Deer program. So, just to follow up, I think the council's familiar with some of the history on this, but the program originally started in 2013 with a bow hunting program. We started out harvesting 72 deer, I think, that first year.
Yes.
The goal was to try to target resident deer as opposed to migratory deer. And then in 2024, the private contractor that we had that was kind of leading the bow harvesting decided he was no longer interested in doing that with the city, and he backed out. and that no longer is an option. And this is a graph that Andy had actually prepared, I think, last year for the city council. But you can really see how the harvesting of deer has declined since those initial a couple of years. And I think I didn't collect any data on roadkill deer, but you can see that even from 2023, we still had, it looks like 11 or 12 deer that were harvested, and we, through the program, had no deer harvested in 2024. So the urban deer program, managed through the Department of Wildlife Resources, allows the city to trap and euthanize deer. Public Works agreed to manage that urban deer program last year, based on resident requests, though. The city was required to obtain a COR with the WR, and that COR requires the city to have an ordinance restricting feeding of wild deer, and it limits the time frame of when deer can be harvested to between August 1st and October 15th. A lot of this presentation, I kind of catered to the email that we had from one of the residents recently, and so some of these are kind of answering some of the points that she brought up. So she asked about baiting of wild animals, about the city passing a code, and that's actually a requirement, in our COR, that we have such an ordinance, and it does say that it is unlawful to bait wild animals, defined as non-domesticated mammalian wildlife, including moose, deer, elk, raccoon, skunks, etc. It doesn't mean that you can't put out bird feeders if you want birds or something like that. But it is already an ordinance. She also asked about requiring residents to move debris that could be habitat for deer. We do have a nuisance ordinance that does, I think, is a little bit, maybe not very easily enforceable, and maybe doesn't completely address the issue, but the part of that I found just on the accumulation says it's unlawful and shall be considered a nuisance for any owner or occupant of real property located within the city limits to allow the accumulation or growth of noxious weeds, garbage, refuse, manure, or any unsightly or deleterious objects, conditions, or structures on such properties when such structures create a fire hazard or a source of contamination or pollution, a breeding ground for habitation of insects or rodents or other form of life deleterious to human habitation. So I think that might be a little bit of a stretch, but we do have that in our code. Whether or not we really want to spend city resources, there's a lot of areas throughout the city that there's a lot of native growth that I think residents are very happy and pleased to have, and I don't know exactly how we draw the line on that. But the trapping program, DWR recommends that to bait a trap for 1 week prior to actually setting the trap, so that the deer can get more acclimated and less skittish, and it makes it easier to trap.
Did our code give an exception for allowing bait for this?
Yes, absolutely, it does.
Okay.
Actually,
there was an exception for city employees.
It was that were part of this trapping program.
Right.
Yeah. After the trapping the deer, the trap can be collapsed to kind of hold the deer in place. A city employee would use a bolt gun to euthanize the deer, but that may not be completely effective, and they may have to, slit the throat to make sure that it's dead. Very likely to be very messy. I think the council's probably aware of that. It is part of it. The intent is to remove the deer from site as cleanly as we can, and to clean it somewhere else and take it off to be butchered.
I've never killed a deer without slitting its throat immediately. It's the first thing you do.
First thing you do, absolutely. The city requires, as part of the agreement that the resident signs, the application for the city to come out and set the trap. The city requires that resident agrees not to photograph or video the entire process, and the residents are asked to ensure that no one interferes with the trap while it's on their property. It kind of spells out people that live on that property, but I would hope that they would make sure other people aren't coming by and prematurely setting off the trap or messing with it in any other way. DWR suggests that we release bucks that are captured. It does concern me if we do get a captured buck, how safe it might be to release it. And not be injured ourselves. We don't want that to happen. If you want to advance it. We had the one request in 2024. The application was submitted to the city on 10/9, and we had to have the trap out by 10/15. So we set it. I think we set it on a Thursday. We'll debate back and forth, or choose not to debate whether or not our employee properly, took a look to make sure that the traps hadn't been sprung in that time. The picture on the top there is not from the trap that was set. That was a picture that's just on the DWR's website for the urban deer program. The picture below that is the trap that was taken by the city employee on Sunday after the trap had been set by Monday, so on 10/13. That's the condition that obviously had been sprung. We think that maybe somebody had released a deer that had been in there, but we don't know that that's the case, and that's just the condition where we found it. And then we came out the next day to remove the trap.
Chris, sorry to interrupt. Mr. Mayor, I move that we extend the meeting to 10:15.
I'll second it.
I have a motion by Doug and a second by Scott. Do we need to do roll call or just, is those in favor?
Aye.
And that was 3/5.
No, okay, I only saw 2 ayes. Is there another aye?
Yes.
Okay, so we got
Okay.
3.
And by the way, parliamentary, it's yes or no, not aye or nay. Yes or no.
So
Yes.
the options that we have for the city council to consider. We could continue with the existing trapping program that we have managed by Public Works employees. We could consider proactively setting traps on city-owned property, which was something the council chose not to do when this was discussed last year, but it's also another option. We could hire an outside contractor that might be more proactive than city staff in helping to harvest the deer. We could be more proactive in enforcing some of those ordinances against feeding, especially the baiting of deer. We could allow residents to install an 8-foot fence around their garden areas like the one resident has suggested, or we could choose, the city council could choose to take no actions at all and let the deer just live their lives in harmony with everyone else. I would have a couple of suggestions, though, or recommendations if we continue the program with the city public works employees maintaining the trapping program. I think we could probably redo some training that we've had from DWR to make sure that we're doing it right. I think it would be great if we were to visually document when we set traps so that we have some sort of record of the traps being set correctly. And also to document the daily inspections of traps, just so that we can show that we've been there. We inspected it when we came out this day. It had not been set up. We could consider installing trail cameras to monitor traps. I think we do want to check with DWR to make sure that's okay, because I know in the wild you can't, but I don't know that would be the case with the urban deer harvesting program.
I was surprised when I learned that 7,000 deer are killed every year on the highways in Utah. 7,000.
That's a lot.
How many in Highland? I mean, how do we compare to other cities? Do we have a problem that other cities, is it higher than other cities?
I think,
we know?
I don't know. I don't have that information, how it relates. I did look up, I think there are 17 other cities in the state of Utah that are on this program. Alpine's one of them. I know Elk Ridge is one of them. American Fork is one of them. Pleasant Grove, I know, used to be part of the program, but on the list that I saw on DWR's website, they were not listed currently. Salt Lake City was, but it didn't have any statistics for numbers on any of those.
I'd actually heard that maybe Draper and Alpine are not doing it any longer. I know they might be on DW website. Chief Patton, you kind of mentioned. Have you heard that in their council meetings that they're not doing this, or where's that information come from?
It was they do not allow hunting on any of their city property. Both
so they don't
Alpine
do the trapping
and
of deer?
Draper. I don't know about the trapping. I'm not aware that they're trapping anything.
Okay, so we don't know if Alpine's trapping or not. I'm doing this trap.
They could have an active COR with DWR, but they don't actually go out and set traps anymore. That's also possible. Just because they've registered with the state doesn't necessarily mean they're actively trapping. I think it would be helpful if we had a contact information for residents to contact the city if they notice that a trap has been sprung, or to let us know if a deer has been captured, so that we're not relying on our staff employees making visits out to the site. I think we really need to bait the trap for a week prior to setting the trap, which might say that we have a cutoff date for October 1st for applications, just so that we're actually following the procedures as outlined by DWR. And I think we need to make sure that it's an opt-in program for public work employees. We don't want someone who, you know, wasn't necessarily hired to harvest deer to feel like that's part of their required
So,
job duties.
Scott, you were on the council when this was instituted. Was it mainly to try to not have animals on the road get hit? Was it that?
Well, there were several reasons, and the deer population, because we've been harvesting, even though it had dropped rather dramatically. Yeah, if you count them up, we've harvested quite a few deer. The problem we were having, and I still think it exists, is that if you really like to garden, a deer is devastating, and it's almost impossible to keep them out. I've tried everything I can think of. And we were having trouble with, we'd have a couple bucks in our yard that would get rutting and fighting and do whatever deer do. My wife would go out to shoo them off, and they'd chase her out of the yard. So it's a danger as well. So we were having trouble back then because there was one of the fire trucks and one of the pickup trucks or whatever that hit a deer, and it cost us $6,000. So, and there were deer on the roads. I mean, I remember there was a deer on the Alpine Highway that laid dead there for I don't know how long, and somebody, as a joke, put a sign up, a veal, $2.49 a pound, because it takes a while for the Division of Wildlife Resources to come get these deer off the road. And I'm sorry, if you hit a deer, it's automatically $2,000 to $5,000 damage to your car. And so I just think I support, at least for a year, trying this trapping program. I know it's another burden on the city staff, but if not, then I would recommend and would push to have an outside contractor to come in if the trapping program doesn't work, because after the deer start going up in numbers, and it doesn't take them long, you'll get lots of complaints. I mean, I'm having people complaining to me about the raccoons, and I just said, yeah, they're not protected, so you deal with it.
I've trapped them. You wouldn't believe how hard they are to kill, by the way.
Yeah.
So
a 9mm, you have to empty it.
So I think
Right.
one question I'd have the council, is this a city's responsibility? I mean, you know, these are deer, they're in residence neighborhood, you know, residence yard. Why is it the city's responsibility? Is it for safety?
It's safety.
It's safety on the roads.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we do need to address it. I really like what Scott has just said. I think we try the one, and if it doesn't work, we very quickly pull the trigger on hiring an outside.
I mean, how much money are you willing to spend?
That we'd have
We'll
to
have
talk
to
about when we talk about the budget.
That's what I'm just trying to say. There is
Yeah.
a cost that's associated.
Well, but we wouldn't do it till next year's budget.
Any further discussion or any further direction you need?
I'll just add one comment. Just before earlier today, Gretchen got a phone call from a resident asking what we can do about the deer, and she says that she has had more calls recently, and I think it makes a lot of sense when we look at the decline in the harvesting program that, you know, we haven't been harvesting as much as a city, so the population is probably
It's increasing.
Okay, we'll move on to our next communication item, which is golf carts. That's going to be you, Ron.
Yes. Do we have a report from Chief William?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As requested, I called around and spoke with the chiefs of our neighboring agencies. So let me start with American Fork and Cedar Hills. Cedar Hills.
Will you just pull this a little closer so we can get it?
So Cedar Hills is removing their traffic tables to accommodate golf carts.
They are?
No, I'm just kidding. Sorry with you.
I talked to Kelly Smith for 45 minutes. That's
I think
not
I
true.
fed hook, line, and sinker in your little joke there. So,
American Fork and Cedar Hills have no intentions of allowing golf carts on their city streets. Alpine has discussed it in the past. However, they've yet to do anything about it, and it may come up in the future. And I'm going to read some of the direct comments that I got from them. So in Lehigh, council members have discussed the conversations from time to time. The chief hasn't been privy to those, but believe they've resisted allowing golf carts by ordinance due to safety concerns. In the past, they've had incidents of juveniles on city streets where the carts were overloaded with juveniles and driving recklessly. On a few occasions, they've been involved in traffic accidents and juveniles were injured severely. I I think the consensus among the council in Levi is that the golf carts are not built to adequately protect the occupants or the drivers in case of a collision. On a side note, they do have private communities located near Thanksgiving Point that are allowed to drive golf carts on those privately owned streets.
Excuse me, Chief, on those communities, they do not allow golf carts, right?
They do.
They do allow them.
Correct. And private subdivisions.
And that's where they had these problems?
No, the problems that they were having were on public city streets.
Where they're not allowed?
Where they're not allowing them, correct.
Okay.
By licensed drivers or by kids?
They're just saying they're not allowing them on public streets, no matter the age.
It's interesting, when they don't allow them, they're still having accidents.
Correct.
So when you allow them, I mean, I don't know how the accidents are going to go up by allowing them, especially if we put some restrictions. We'll talk about it a little bit later when you're finished with your presentation here. But if we require registration, that they know all that list that you gave us last time, they understand that and they agree to it and they get a sticker and it goes on their window, then you know if that golf cart has been authorized to be on our city streets. And we tell them which streets they can go on and which ones they can't go on. It seems safer to me than saying we don't allow them and they're using them anyway.
What's the other reports from other cities?
So from Pleasant Grove, the discussions were held that resulted from citizens' complaints about kids using golf cart on the streets. Similar narratives, carts full of juveniles messing around. These are just notes that I've taken. Not following traffic laws such as the stop sign, proper lane travel, evening times with no headlights. It also came on the heels of the Lehigh accident on the golf carts, which it sent the kids to the hospital. Nobody's ever presented it to allow them, and the police department's enforcing them to get off the streets. And then Saratoga Springs, they don't have any knowledge that they've ever considered it on dedicated streets. They do have a couple of private HOAs where they do allow golf carts, but no traffic laws are enforced on the HOAs since it's private property, with the exception of DUIs if those occur. So that's the report that we have from our neighboring cities.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Ron.
Well, and there's also, are you aware of what happened in Alpine? There was an accident with some kids.
Yeah, we did have an accident in Alpine. It was about 24 months ago, where we had some kids that were...
And they don't allow them. So we're having accidents with kids where they're not allowed. My thought is if we allow them, and we heard from Aaron, and I've worked quite a bit with Aaron on this. I've not taken this lightly. I've done a lot of research on it. And it seems safer to me, and this is just my perspective, but if we were to do something, and Rob, you'll have to let us know if this is even doable, but we have Scott, you talked about that long list, and how do we communicate that to the public? Well, you communicate it by saying, if you want to have a golf cart on our streets, you have to sign a document, and we give them a packet of that information, and we'll give them maps of where that golf cart can be and where it cannot be. And they understand all the restrictions, one person per seat. We could require seat belts. I don't know if we want to do that, but whatever it is, that's in that packet. They agree to it, and then we give them a little sticker that goes on their windshield. It's a logo of the city, and it says golf cart is authorized or whatever. We charge them $25 to register it. That registration is not a vehicle registration. It's a registration that says, I have studied the requirements of this golf cart usage, and I agree to it. Okay, you agree to it, you sign it. Once you sign it, you get the sticker. You, as a police force, then know if it has a sticker that it's okay, and if it's on the right streets. If it's on UDOT Street, you know it's not okay. But to me, it seems like, because we're already having accidents with golf carts, and we're not authorizing them. Alpine doesn't authorize them, and they had an accident. So to me, it's, and where those accidents you talked about weren't authorized there. So if we authorize it and give people like Aaron and a seemingly a large community, I think we'll get a lot more people in our meeting where we're actually taking action on this than we had today with just Aaron. But I would like us to see us consider it. with the idea that we're putting restrictions on it and we're putting an education program in place that we know you're not going to get that sticker until you've gone through that education program, which is basically reading the booklet and sign off that you've read it. It could be 5 pages, it could be 10 pages, but whatever it is, and you're agreeing to the maps. Okay, here's where it's allowed, here's not where it's allowed. So anyway, that's what I would like to see us move forward with and bring it back next time for a vote.
Anyone like to give Ron some input?
I'm fine to bring that back.
My impression from previous discussions is that
You're the swing vote.
Brittany and Scott are opposed to this. That being the case, I would prefer actually to have Ron and I study this offline, and then we can get it on an agenda. If we, yep. Right. Yep.
So,
staff clarification, it takes two council members to put something on the agenda. So are you two still wanting it to immediately come on the agenda, or do you want to delay?
I think that we investigate and then decide if we want it to be on a future agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just make a request for something that you study, just that I would like input from Rob on, is the Utah code about golf carts. I would just be interested to know, because my reading of the code says that we're not allowed to require vehicle identification, license plate, registration, or a driver's license to drive a golf cart.
That's
so I would
right.
just like to understand.
This doesn't fit that.
Right. So I would just like to make sure that we understand what those things are that we are and are not allowed to.
Yeah, it simply is agreeing. It's a sticker that says, I agree to the conditions you've set on this cart.
And then I would like to, I would not like to continue the meeting again, because we have a closed session and we had an early session as well.
okay. We are now at 10:15, so we would have to have an extension. We do have 2 items, quarterly finance and legislative update. So if we don't have a motion to extend, then we need a motion to. Let me ask you this, David, is there something that's really vital in your information?
No, I sent the information out to each of the council members for you to review and ask questions at whatever point you want to.
So I move that we do not extend the
Well,
meeting.
then you can adjourn. You move to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
No, we're not
Wait.
adjourn.
We have to
Stephanie,
do
will you
closed
bring us
session.
up a motion?
We have a motion to go to closed session. I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
And just a quick, I would like to see the quarterly update on the next agenda rather than just dropping it entirely.
Okay, I'll make the motion then. I move that City Council recess the regular City Council meeting to convene in a closed meeting in the executive conference room to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation and the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual.
I'll second.
Have a motion by Scott, second by Kim. All in favor, say yes. We need a motion. We actually have to do a vote.
Roll call.
Yeah. So do we have a Slido to go up or not? Okay, we'll just start down here with Brittany.
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Doug?
Yes.
Kim?
Aye.
And Ron.
Yes.
We're now in closed